to snarf food.
We have
food to
food.
snarf.
I'm still hungry.
Okay, perfect.
There wasn't much left.
Chili cheese dog lumps are available.
You're always the optimist.
Board Member Metcalf is not here, I see. Board Member Ranville is
Here.
present. Board Member Rudnicki
Here.
is present. Board Member Samuelson is absent. You have a quorum. Put it away right now.
Swallow that cookie. Thank you, Glenn. Okay, so we'll start with Board Member Ranville. A presentation on family-friendly cities that we've long awaited. Thank you. It's all yours.
All right, great. Well, this is actually a combination of two presentations that I gave this fall. And so, and I'll be beginning with the material from the Babies to Boomers Assessment Tools to Create Livable, Sustainable Communities for All Ages, and that was the APA Colorado Conference. And then also a Sustainability Toolkit for Family-Friendly Cities at the Downtown Colorado Conference, and that was in Golden. So, and I'm going to be, as I go through the material, I'll highlight how it's relevant to Littleton and even thinking about how it might apply to our comprehensive plan. And so to begin, we looked at the assessment and looked at cities from looking at it from a quantitative point of view and looking at the data. And so there's 12 main categories, 36 subcategories, and the data that we have looked at is from national databases, so census data and other sources. And essentially it's a way where you can compare different cities. And so we looked at 21 cities in Colorado, and we'll look at how Littleton compares. But I wanted to call attention to a few unique categories in the assessment. And it's looking at the balance of ages, child population, household size, family support structure, housing for families, so 3+ bedrooms, housing for older adults, child care, care for older adults, and living and working in the city. I thought were a few of the more unique categories that may not be found in other assessments. So, and here's an overview for Littleton, and I'll go in the next two slides and talk about why certain categories are higher than others. And so overall, 4 triangles, so it's very simple, like behind the scenes, there's actually an Excel spreadsheet, so all the data goes into it. But this is actually a very simple overview from a 1 to 5 triangle to see how in each category is Littleton doing. And transportation, I'll get into why there's a 2. And in many of the categories, it was fairly high. Housing, employment, safety, culture, recreation, services, health, and resources. And so here's some of the strengths. And this will start to go into the 36 subcategories to pull out more specifics. So people living in poverty is low, percent of high school grads is high, school quality, places of worship, number of parks, employment rate, relatively low in comparison to where we're at. To medium household income is good, number of child care providers, home care, assisted living providers, crime, hospitals, and water quality is good. But I wanted to call attention to some of the areas for improvement and just some of the things to keep in mind. Average age is high, household size is low, number of trade schools. While we have Arapahoe Community College, there isn't a lot of diversity for a number for the size of city as what we were finding with other cities. Grocery stores is low. This is where we get into transportation of why we're on the lower end of the transportation. And we were looking at work commute time, and we're on the high side, so it's about almost 30 minutes is the average work commute time. The percent of people who live and work in the city is about 24%, so that's on the lower side. And transportation to work, other than a car by itself, is very high. Even though we have light rail and we have bus, for the most part, everyone does, for the most part, a lot of people do drive.
What
maybe you'll show it in the data, what is the average number of trade schools or type of trade schools that would cater to an area like this?
You know, that's interesting. You know, as far as the average, I don't have that number right offhand, but we did take the number of trade schools by the population. And so the city of Littleton did not fare as well based on some of the other cities that we looked at in Colorado. Because we had basically Arapahoe Community College, and we really didn't have other trade schools. Some other cities had more specialty trade schools, maybe not as big as Arapahoe Community College, so they had more diversity.
So like an auto tech program or an IT program or something like that? We don't have a DeVry. Is that
Oh, just,
something that would illustrate that?
but basically it was looking at the number by the population. So number-wise, we're on the low side for trade schools.
All of these ratings are based on the greater set of data that you looked at. So you said it
Right,
was-
so there is some relativeness in the sense of we are essentially comparing, we took, actually had some example cities, not just in Colorado, but nationally. We started to develop a range of what's on the high end, what's on the low end, and what's in the middle. And so we took, so basically a 3 triangle is fairly average, and we set that as the midpoint. So essentially, cities would get more credit if they were higher, less if they were lower. So, and this is kind of interesting. This is an age structure pyramid diagram. And it's just interesting to see Littleton and how it compares to, for example, Greeley. And the idea would be a true pyramid, but, you know, let's face it, every city's different, and it's not really going to be a true pyramid. But Greeley it has more of the pyramidal shape, and we found that just about every city has some demographic that has a bulge in a certain sense. They're in the younger population for Greeley. And Commerce City is a young city. They're growing. And you can see that base of the child population tapers when they graduate, and then the parents who are raising children again, and then it tapers to the top. Littleton is very upright, and so it doesn't have more of the pyramidal form, the base of children that would be more ideal and then taper towards the top. So this is looking at all the cities and that we looked at. We tried to pick cities that were mountain, they could be rural, they could be urban, and small cities, large cities. Tried to get a sampling in Colorado. And Highlands Ranch did quite well.
What ranking? Ranking for what?
Oh, to rank how family friendly they are, as far as, and looking at the 12 categories, so community, transportation. So yes, so looking at all the 12 categories, then this is an overall of how each of the cities did. And so Highlands Ranch won, and a lot of it had to do with the housing. Montrose 2, Grand Junction, Durango, Alamosa, and Littleton in 8th. Wheat Ridge is last, but I see them as a city that would be moving up.
Was there a different weighting to different elements, or were they all weighted the same?
You know, that's a good question. And what we did is we felt that there were certain categories, the 36 subcategories, that were more important than others, so we gave a higher weighting to those. For example, crime. We wanted to make sure that had a weighting of 5, and so we had a 1 to 5. So there were certain ones that were core, we thought, that needed for sure to be weighted at that highest 5 rating.
Were there particular aspects about any of these towns that made them stand out as a family-friendly place?
Yes. The housing was big as far as the 3+ bedrooms, because you couldn't attract the families with the kids if you didn't have a high enough percent of 3+ bedrooms. And so you didn't have, again, it goes back to the balance of ages, and so all the housing is big, the affordability, that was a big factor too. The smaller towns we found did a little bit better because they're more walkable, shorter commute times, more likely that people would live and work in the same city. So there were some attributes that did come out to be helping certain cities to weight higher than others.
I think it's great, we're on the top 10.
Yes, yes. And then to just call attention to the 12 main categories to see where Littleton is in each and community, they're 14th. Again, that's looking at a lot of the age demographics, a lot of the demographic information. And education, Boulder, it's not, that's pretty explanatory of why they'd be number one with a college. Definitely a college town, but had a number of colleges. And then the education level, too, of those who live there. And recreation, Littleton at 10th. Housing, 9th. Highlands Ranch did quite well in that category. They're very strong in that category. Employment, Littleton 13th. Cost of living, 14th. And services, a lot of towns did pretty well for that, especially once the equalization factor, the number of services to the size of the city, it seemed that the smaller cities did better. Transportation, that's 19th. We're on the low end of that. Safety, 10th. Culture, a lot of cities did good. Health, 7th. Resources, 15th. And that was looking at water and air quality. This I thought was just kind of interesting, looking at family housing utilization rate. Because I thought it was interesting, some of the cities that didn't have as high a percent of 3+ bedrooms were actually using them more for the families with the children that they were being used for. And so Littleton is pretty average. They have about 50% 3+ bedrooms. And however, so we could support more families with children. But we do talk about, once you live in Littleton, you want to stay in Littleton. So there's not a lot of good housing options, even if the older adults want to move and downsize.
What does a housing option for a older family look like?
You know, something that's smaller, not as many bedrooms. If it's accessible, that'd be great. So you don't have to take the stairs to be able to have all your primary living on the first floor, or you're in a complex that has an elevator. So patio homes. So those type of homes are more attractive as mobility needs change.
Less land. to take
Less
care of.
land, yes, less land. And I already went through several of these in the workshop, so I'm just going to flip through them pretty quickly, but just calling attention to where families living, where there's the high concentration of infrastructure, where it's overlapping. And then how close are they living to the jobs? And thinking about where are the jobs, how many jobs are here in Littleton versus centers that, like Denver and the tech centers that pull, there's certainly a big draw for jobs. And then the resources, how close are the resources to where the larger households are living, the families, to where the business centers are. And so the grocery stores, we're on that low side for a number of grocery stores for our residents. And we just, for urban farms or commercial farms, that's an area that we could work on. I don't think we have anything significant in the city for local food that we can grow right here. And again, this is one of the slides from the workshop, but just calling attention to where the larger households living that have that high concentration of 3 or more per household versus the jobs. And neither one is a strength for us, even though most cities are strong in one or the other. Ideally, you'd want that overlap. So it's just something to keep in mind that we can continue to strive for. Big challenges ahead. I think we all know housing is a big challenge ahead. Looking at just our demographics, both the older adult population and then families with children. And then the jobs, it seemed like that came out a lot too, and even the survey that went out recently for 900 households, how jobs are something that to keep on our radar and increase. The education, to continue to keep the quality of education, even though we have declining enrollment, and the financial aspect of our city. Transportation, food, the grocery stores, commercial farm, shopping for daily needs, services. We're going to have greater demand with the older adult population increasing, education, trade schools, and just thinking about more economic generators. Housing variety. Here were just a few ideas to throw out. It's interesting because a development oftentimes will go in and they'll do one housing type for one particular group, and as people age or as their needs change, they have to move completely out of the neighborhood or completely out of that development. But to think about how can we encourage that maybe every third or fourth unit is different, so we can have, as their needs change, they can actually move down the street. They can actually move up a floor, down a floor, and find the housing that meets their needs. The group housing, and we do have that, it's in our code. It's interesting because that could be retrofitting existing homes in our neighborhoods to have more group housing so that people don't actually have to move out of their neighborhood if they need more assistance. Consider accessory dwelling units. I know that is continually becoming a more interesting topic out there. And a village housing model, which I'll get into a little bit later, but it has to do more with services. So, and housing, Stapleton, of course, is one that's such a big development, cannot not mention it. It's one of those examples of if you build it, the families will come. And they do have a high percent of 3+ bedrooms, and the families did come, and the houses or the school enrollment certainly up there. So it's just one of those things to think about, is how important design is. If we design and plan for it, and we do a good job, you're going to get the group's needs met, and they're going to want to live there. And this is a co-housing project. I thought it's interesting because it's a higher density. This is 3 stories, and it's attractive for all ages. And it is walking distances in Boulder, so Wild Sage co-housing, walking distance to parks, shops, trails, bus stop. It's mixed income, and it's child-friendly, it's eco-friendly. So it's interesting because you can do multifamily that is attractive for all ages. And this is the village housing model, and I think it's an interesting one to bring up with services as our older adult population increases, in that it's a nonprofit and it's a membership base, and there's a number that people can call for chores, home repairs, rides, computer assistance. They also have social events, and this it's a national model that's throughout the country, but it happens to be that the Washington Park Cares is in Denver, so there is a local presence, and it's a way that people can remain independent in their homes longer, and it also means that they're not reliant on, they don't have to call the city for these services. They can feel like they have more ownership and they're more independent, that they can call and get that direct help.
And Jenny, the people that provide the services are volunteers?
You know, it is interesting. I believe it's based on a lot of volunteers, and I believe there is some paid staff because someone has to receive all the calls and coordinate and ensure that there's a certain time frame that they guarantee that will be able to get your ride, to get your chores done. So, but I believe it's a lot of volunteer-based, so within that community.
$600 a year, you would hope to be a few professionals around to
Yes.
do drywall repair for whatever, not
Right.
not some volunteer.
Oh, no. Yes, they have a list of good home repair improvement individuals too, that are dependable and they know are reliable, so that they're not going to be taken advantage of.
But you pay for that in addition.
But you pay, yeah, that would be something you'd pay for in addition. If it's something really small, I'm sure that a volunteer could probably do it, change a light bulb or do something minor. But yes, if you're talking about a bathroom remodel or something, that they have a list of professionals that they can connect people with.
There was an article in the paper about this sometime this year. I remember reading about it. And it started with an individual, an elderly individual that hired, I believe, if it's the same story. And they started bringing groups together, found out about this national forum. And so coming back to your question, Mark, it was, at least what I remember reading, the intent was let the aging population stay in their own home, but make sure they're not climbing the roof to clean the gutters and those kind of day-to-day things, without it being just an expensive thing that you have to outsource continuously. So that's what the intent. Sounds like it's the same program.
But for $600, I'd hope there'd be some standard services you don't pay for, like gutter cleaning or
Snow removal, I
Yeah.
think it was things like that.
Has to
Like,
be.
it sounds like a combination of like HOA types of fees or services and access to providers of additional services.
All right, so we're going to start to get into the toolkit and a lot of pictures. So looking at multimodal streets, from pedestrians, bikes, even low-speed vehicles and charging stations. And to just think about connectivity, whatever projects we're doing to encourage that businesses don't just turn their backs to neighborhoods, but that we actually think about how people can access and use the shops. All right, so great examples. Littleton actually is a great example for pedestrian transit, the downtown Littleton portion, Main Street and the light rail station. So we can do it well. We've done it well in Littleton in part of our city. And so when you start to move away from Main Street, then it becomes less pedestrian friendly. So there's certainly ways that we can improve our city. And bicycle examples, it's interesting because we did the bicycle master plan. And I think it's great we did that, although we have a lot of share roads, and we don't have a lot of dedicated, I haven't seen the dedicated bicycle lanes. And so you can call attention to this is good, this is better, this is best. And it's interesting because looks like it's within the right-of-way, using that additional space. Here, they actually removed a lane and made this a bicycle lane with a buffer, and then this is obviously the most expensive option, where you have a lot of the paving material and the markings and really this dedicated design. But it works very well. It's a great system. This is in Montreal, that's Peoria, that's Denver. Here's us at Santa Fe, and this is thinking about just all levels of riders. This guy is pretty confident crossing. This little boy, not so much. This is my son. We like to stay to dedicated crosswalks, less busy streets, dedicated bike lanes. And it's always wonderful when there's a bit of a buffer, because it just makes us feel better that if he veers out a foot or two, that he's not going to get hit. So it's something to think about to encourage more biking, is starting to look at how do we do dedicated lanes within the city, not just sharing the road. Although we have this is great for bicycle parking, the bike racks at the Littleton station, but boy, we could use more of these throughout the city. And it'd be interesting to tap into the bike sharing program and have one of these stations at the Littleton station or the Mineral station. And then the Platte River Trail, this is just a huge arterial for biking. And let's take advantage of it. And we talked about the South Platte River being a major, one of those transformative areas. This is also a nice, wide sidewalk bike path. That's in Stapleton. All right, so thinking about multimodal streets and the different types of transportation, and not just thinking about what we might commonly see, but maybe scooters, electric vehicles, low-speed vehicles. And I think we're going to be seeing more of these low-speed vehicles around, especially as we start to get places that sell them on Santa Fe. I think we're going to start to see people driving them more. And this is one, actually, the city of Littleton. There's a picture of one of the low-speed vehicles. But there are different options available. There's even, an 8-passenger, or there's even 11, 12-passenger shuttles you could actually have around the city. And there's even handicap-accessible versions, too. So I think there's a lot of options that the low-speed vehicles, if we start to think about the design, they're a quarter the size for a standard parking space. And but thinking about the connectivity, because they can only go on streets that are 35 miles per hour and less. And then thinking about charging, where do you charge? How far can you go? And having places where, destinations where you could charge up vehicles. And then the South Platte River Corridor, I think we've been doing a lot of talking about that as one of our transformative projects, and making that fun for outdoor, also business, recreational use.
Jenny, just one question before you leave
Okay.
transportation. I'm wondering specifically where Littleton scores real low in the family-friendly on the transportation. Does it have to do with the multimodal, the bikes, or the sidewalk, or what aspect of it
So
contributed to that most?
there's 3 areas. The commute time, because the theory is that if you're commuting a longer amount of time, you're away from being able to do other things, the family or other activities. So the commute time was long. Even though we have public transportation, majority of people don't use it as a percentage of the population. And even though we've got the light rail, you think about it, mostly people just use it to go to Denver. It's not being, when you think about the places in Littleton you'd want to go to and connect to frequently, to get there, you'd have to go up and then over and then down. And I mean, to even think about going to Park Meadows, it's just ridiculous. The RTD light rail circuit you'd have to take. A lot of people just drive. It's just faster. And then percent of people who live and work in the city. So is that 24%? In general, all the metropolitan cities had a lower percent for people who live and work in the city, but just all those compounding factors put Littleton out of the 21 cities at 19th.
So a place like, say, Montrose was on the list, and I don't remember, but maybe they scored high on the transportation because, well, there's probably not a lot of other places to work other than Montrose, so they probably scored high on that living and working in the same community. But that doesn't necessarily mean they have good multimodal
Right.
roads or
Right. That's
sidewalks
the-
on every street. Or
Right.
Okay.
But these smaller towns, it's interesting because they can walk and bike more. And that while they may not have all the public transportation available to them, they're able to walk and bike, and then they also can, everything's in a closer proximity, so they can drive faster or get to something quicker. So
I missed one of your 3, so commute time to work.
commute time to work,
Live and work in the city. What was the third?
and then the percent of people who drive in the automobile for commuting. And there were other cities that had public transit, but more people used it. So it was a higher percent, whereas Littleton's still low in comparison, even though we have a stop. We have a couple stops, so. All right, so just looking at the South Platte Corridor from Bellevue to Mineral as being really great area to develop. All right, and we're going to get to public spaces and show some of the cities that have great pedestrian amenities. And something in common is the public restrooms, seating, benches, children play areas. Those are some things that cities are putting on their radar screen. And Grand Junction did a great job when they redid 2011 their Main Street. And you can see some of the play areas, and it's amazing how close those are to the street. And within a couple feet, but they have the fencing, and it's done well, and it's you feel comfortable with the kids, even though they are that close, playing, that it's really well done. And
Is it a median or no?
is it a median? No, the actual.
Lower left.
Looks like it's
It's up against against the commercial. Okay.
There's the commercial.
And so it looks like even the street, though, it seems like it's a slower street.
Oh, yes, and it's actually a serpentine design, and so, yes, the cars move through it slower, but they've,
So this was the right-of-way at one time, this was the...
yes, that was the right-of-way at one time. Actually, the Serpentine Street that came in the 60s. They were actually forward-thinking on that. So really, this was an uplift project just to refresh and rejuvenate a lot of the amenities and also replace aging infrastructure. So they added a lot of the play areas. And the wayfinding, the information is excellent. They also have a public restroom. It was really enjoyable. We actually stayed there longer with our family because it was so enjoyable. Oh yeah, well, I mean, we ate there. We had ice cream, and yes, we did walk around and see the city. So, Wheat Ridge wanted to show their pop-up cafes, and I think it's a really neat design. And one of the 14 new businesses opened in 2012, and I think that's significant. And I think any city during this economic time that has 14 new businesses open on one street is feeling pretty good. All right, Golden, and they're also quite family friendly. They have activated their creek. The pedestrian bridge is wonderful to cross. Play areas, their park is right. They've activated that too. Accessible. There's someone in a wheelchair you can see there. So it's a really neat town to take all ages. And Salida, I wanted to call attention when we were talking about the South Platte River and activating that. This is a town of only 5,000 people, and they have done a wonderful job activating their waterfront. They have the National Whitewater Rapids, the National Whitewater Festival is in Salida, and they have the amphitheater is right against the river, plus the park is right next door, plus the climbing wall is right there too. Downtown terminates and ends at the river, and so you have just wonderful business activity because of the waterfront, and it's really enjoyable. We spend a lot of time up there in the summer. All right, we're going to get into food and thinking about where do you grow food, from commercial farming to maybe on the roof. So let's go into, this is Agriburbia, the TSR group. They're out of Golden. This is their Table Mountain Farms is their pilot farm, and it is, I think it's interesting to talk about because of the various uses on one site. This is a site with a couple acres. It's in a residential neighborhood. They are commercial farming. They have a farm pickup, which the building that has the farm pickup inside, plus that's their office. And they also live there's a residence on the site too. So it's interesting to think about, does our zoning allow for something like this? They have actually farm kits available that they're developing that are modeled after this farm to commercially grow food on 2 to 10 acres worth of land. One of their farms, they gave an example, a third of an acre can grow 6,000 pounds of fresh produce. So it's very productive use of the land.
The issue with this, with respect to land use too and comp plan, is we were working with them at Stapleton, and they were running into issues with productive farmland cannot be counted as public open space. So it was something as simple as that. Because it had a commercial aspect to it, it was not allowed on space that was considered open space or parks land. So,
Is this subsidized, or is it
This is not subsidized. This is commercial farming, and he has his own employees. This is not subsidized. This is profitable. It's highly efficient. He's developed, in talking to him, it's amazing what he has gone through in research. He's really got this down, and it's profitable. So,
And they won't do one unless they know that there's a reasonable return on it.
Yeah, I just would think that'd be heavily subsidized. That's
no,
my
this
prejudice,
is
but
not subsidized.
Wow, okay.
And they're farming public school land, Denver Public Schools. They're commercially farming their land. So they will farm public, private land, couple acres to thousands of acres. So they are, it's amazing what they can do. And this is growing food on a roof. This is in Montreal. And I got to see this installation. And it's amazing because it didn't require additional structure. It's lightweight, these individual pots, the irrigation's all integrated, and it's really well done. All the food from this installation went to restaurants. So it can be done. We can use our flat roofs. We're a built-out city, but we can grow food on our roofs.
And Jenny, is all this in greenhouses or is it seasonal?
Oh, this is in the summer.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there any that are greenhouses so they do year-round?
For on the rooftop?
Uh-huh.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
And then this is just interesting to see the mixed use, the benefits of mixed use compared to Walmart. I thought this was an interesting case study of Walmart versus a downtown mixed use building, 6 stories. And so you could see the property tax per acre and the mixed use building just skyrockets. And as you go, the Walmart is pretty low. And so you can see how mixed uses has a lot of benefits per acre. And I talked about this, about how we can start to grow food. We can do food. We can have solar on our roofs. We can do xeriscaping. And we have a lot of older homes, but there's, I think, a lot of potential of what we can do with our homes here in Littleton to use our resources. And neighborhood transformations from edible landscaping to we can generate electricity to make it more walkable and bikeable, and perhaps even thinking about our growing food, perhaps being able to count our, especially on commercial projects, if you're growing food and you have a garden, that you can count that towards open space. And so again, thinking about how do we transform our businesses and some of these components, similar to the residential. And that is it. And so essentially you will have more of whatever you invest in the most. And so as we go through with our comprehensive plan, that if we encourage something, we're going to get more of it. And so I think I hope that some of the images and some of the cities and start to think about what can we do in Littleton to improve our city and make it more family for all ages. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. All right, good. Okay, well, good. Well, we can then get into the rest of the agenda, I think. And the idea was to continue on the great discussion we had 2 weeks ago. And I wish we were doing more map exercises because that was a blast. I think we really got a lot out of that too. And thanks for pulling all that. That composite map was really good, Dennis. And,
Good. I have hard copies of that if anybody would like, so, and hard copies of all handouts as well, if people would like those.
Mm-hmm. So I think the plan this evening is to review the draft of the vision and goals that you've put together.
Yeah.
Okay.
We also provide a copy of the notes from the last meeting as well as the notes from the retreat. But, yeah, we thought we'd go through and just work on the vision and the goals we've put together so far. We've done these just as talking points. We certainly don't claim this as an end product, so we just want something to bounce off of you and see if we're on the right track and what are we missing at this point, what can we add to it. We also anticipate that we'll be changing the format and the style of what we're doing, but kind of trying to capture the fact that I think what Tom and Chuck both said at our retreat was, let's try and keep the vision statement to a 1-minute elevator speech, something that really has good sound bites that people can remember. And I think the same is true with the goals. that to the extent that we can keep those with some sound bites, the better the opportunities for us to actually implement that, and the better chance that that will happen, as people remember those things a little bit more easily. So I guess I'd like to kind of open it up and just see, first of all, in the vision, what's everybody's reaction to that? Does that seem like it kind of captures what we're thinking of for Littleton? Is there enough in there, or are we missing things? Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. I will send those down. Anybody else need to send that down?
The same one?
And there's a couple goals on the back of that, too. It's two-sided.
I guess my first comment is, I kind of know what it means, but I just want to talk about it, hear what everybody else says. What does small-town character mean?
I think it's a great question. And it's actually been red flagged by a couple people that, that may be a problem. Yeah, if you look at that. I know Glenn had some concerns about that, too, that may have some implications to people that may be negative in some
I mean,
cases.
to me,
Too restrictive.
you could construe it as, we want to stay podunk, or we want to stay rural, or we want to stay small. But yet, some of the vision that we have, that we talked about on the plan, is fairly big stuff.
It is.
So how do you merge the big stuff, the small town character? I know what it means, but how does it flush out?
But it's interesting because it's certainly one of the things we heard over and over again at the meetings and also online. We've heard the desire to maintain that small town character. And I think we go through and kind of define what that means. We talk about community, I think, is a big part of that. There's a sense that there is a single community here that people relate to, know one another. We have a lot of community events. There really is a strong sense of Littleton. And so a lot of that is more social, as well as the land use part of that probably is providing opportunities for people to get together. We provide those public spaces, you provide opportunity for that interaction. So I think that probably is the big part of the community, as well as the school system and the parks and all those things that come together. Beyond that, I think small town character, we may think about downtown as the area, or Main Street as the area that really maintains that. A lot of it's that history, I think, maintaining the most critical parts of our history, so you have that sense of continuity and the relation to that. Beyond that, I don't think it's limiting necessarily to saying you can't have additional density, you can't have, but I think that's something we really need to flesh out and feel comfortable with. We want to change that term or get rid of it or do something else. But I think it'd be good if we could respond in some way to all those comments we have gotten, that there's a real strong sense that that's why people are here, that's what they like most about Littleton, and how do we respond to that and reflect that in what we say. So any thoughts on that would be really helpful.
And I think you attempted to do that with positioning that it is a vibrant city with a small town character.
Right.
So I think had vibrant city not been part of that and just focus on small town character, then it really leaves a lot of, I don't want to call it subjectivity, but is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? But I think what you're, that it is a vibrant city with a small town character, I think that helps that case.
And the diversity, I think, was part of that, too. That's something we kept hearing. Something we heard from Tom and Chuck, too, is that the most successful small towns, small cities, first-tier cities, are those that actually offer that diversity of opportunities for people. So I think that's important to note as well, that we've got to balance those two things.
We need to come up with a 2 or 3 word statement to replace. It's so easy to say small town, small town character, small town. It's very easy. So somehow we need some PR people to come up with a better description that's not, 6 or 8 words. It just won't fly. I don't know what those 2 words are.
Right, I don't either at this point.
What replaces small town?
Right.
Well, I don't have a problem with small town. We are a small town. We only have 42,000 people-ish.
Well, we better define it somewhere.
Yeah.
Another page, what small town means.
I just wrote
small
down small town values, or when I'm in the building or the built industry And so when I hear character, I think of architecture and look and feel. But when you bring up historic value, you know, the old Western Welcome Week, the community activities, the school system is a tight-knit system within Littleton.
We have a single
Those are
library, a
things
single
that-
museum, you
Yeah,
have one
the
thing.
museum district, or not district, but
Could be.
area. It could be
Someday.
the park system. Those are all small-town assets that we try to cherish and maintain and protect, which I think is very important. So they're still small-townish, but it doesn't mean to me that when we get a new development in along Santa Fe, that it has to have the Main Street look on Santa Fe. It may be very modern, but it may contribute to maintaining the value that we hold in the open space along Platte River and the ability to still have modern, up-to-date businesses, but yet they have connectivity, or they have, and they preserve the corridor or whatever it might be. They still have the values that we protect.
At the risk of taking a leap, I think that most people think of small town, they think of Mayberry and the fishing pole and the walking, but then more specifically, a strong educational system. Was the award we won best place to raise a family or have a family, or capitalize on that strength for that, which then implies the schools, implies safety, implies a lack of bureaucracy, I guess, the ability to know almost anybody in town, and sort of an openness to that. And you know, almost, I don't know if small town character eliminated, the cynic in me said, then we also should add village idiot. Which is what we have, small town character, which it's a rotating job.
Wasn't there a drunk in Mayberry? I can't
There
remember.
was. I'll volunteer for it. I'll audition for the job. I don't want the job. I'll audition. But things of that sort, and in short of going to white picket fence Littleton, which I agree is not the right direction, to capitalize on what that statement is, and just hit the sports and hit the recreation and hit the family friendly and hit the bike paths and all of those things in 3 words or less.
So I'm not hearing an alternative to this, but I hear the same concern that we may need to respond later with the goals or somewhere else with more explanation, but it still kind of leaves that vision kind of standing out there by itself if we don't change it.
You know, I think I heard you say it when you were describing small-town character. I think small-town character is something we talked a lot about in the downtown area plan is appropriate there, but because Littleton, the larger Littleton is a little bit different and wants to be different. You know, I heard you say community with a strong sense of place. Just the idea of a community, maybe it's a tight-knit community or a sense of place in its place in history, or, you know, it brings some of those words together that are a little bit broader than small-town character.
Great. Okay.
But indicate a sense of, a very keen sense of identity.
Good. Everybody okay with that? Head with
Does
that
this
direction?
hometown character give a different connotation than small-town character? Or is that something that... Hometown character.
That's a better word. Yeah. I think people use, my experience in the past is small-town character, people use that as a hammer sometimes, to hammer all the developments that I personally think are a benefit to Littleton in the future. They could use it again if we're proposing some major goals and visions for the Platte Valley. They'll use the small-town character as a hammer against that. Again, let's keep Mayberry and the fishing poles and straw hats. There is a great many people in Littleton still want Littleton to go back to that. They talk about rezoning, or any open space becomes feral ground, left open, grass, etc., even though it's privately owned. So that word small-town character sometimes is, to me, can be a detriment to the future growth of Littleton.
Okay. Other thoughts on that? Yeah.
I don't like the way it starts, that Littleton will continue to evolve and thrive.
Okay.
It's not a statement, it's just like it's to what, and it's, it almost leaves it open that if we continue to evolve and thrive, that's I guess a given. So I don't see it as a part of the vision statement. So I'd want it to be a lot more direct of what
Yeah, but-
it is we want to be, what we thrive to be, what we evolve to be. I don't think we need the words there.
So we would say something like Littleton will strive to be?
I don't think it's about, we will.
We will be?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that something that I attempted to just formulate in my head was, it's something that might sound like to be South Metro's Denver preferred city with a small town community, a place to live, play, and learn. That needs a lot of wordsmithing, but what it's essentially saying is we want to be the preferred city, maintain the small town community. It's the preferred city to live, play, and learn within that small town community. And then you can easily build how we're going to do that. So, how do we prove that, or how do we ensure that it is a place you want to live? We can address all of our housing issues. A place that you want to, a preferred place that you want to play, and we can talk about all the outdoor opportunities, et cetera. A place to learn, we have the community college, we have the seminary, we have Littleton Public Schools. So I think it needs to be a lot stronger and direct than the words that I'm seeing here. And understood by all, I see what you're saying.
If you can give me, I guess, a quick example of what that would be. Do you want to get rid of evolve and thrive, or you just want a different form?
It might sound something like Littleton is the preferred city with small town, I'll leave character for now, with small town character to live, play, and learn. The preferred, maybe my grammar's off too.
Okay.
Preferred, what is that, is a preferred over what?
Other cities in the South Metro area.
Preferred city, something just doesn't sound right with that. A lot of, what does that mean?
A little arrogant.
And
I think in the past, Littleton has had a lot of arrogance that it doesn't deserve.
If you're writing like a mission statement, you would say something like, unlike our competitors. That's what you do. If our competition is Englewood, Sheridan, Highlands Ranch, what are we competing in? Different than them, we are.
Yeah.
I've always had a problem with this, we will be, or we will strive to be, or whatever else it is. And I understand what Mark is saying about hometown, small town, and yet, if you strip this to its essentials, Littleton is a vibrant city with a small town character. The two mesh together. It's not one or the other.
Right.
Abundant assets and diverse opportunities. What more do you really need to say that isn't just gilding the lily?
That's not a vision, it's just saying what it is.
Yes, it is.
The
But the
mission
abundant
statement of
asset.
Littleton right now is right there. Well, I don't know if that's it.
Yeah. It says council.
To preserve a family-oriented and economically vibrant community that encourages citizen involvement, respects diversity, values community character, and enhances the quality of life of Littleton residents and visitors.
That sounds good, right?
Do that. We can use that one. Does that do it for everybody? Does it cover?
Does it say enough to you in terms of, for me, a vision statement should say something to a developer who's coming into town, yes, we're open, or not, we're open. Does that say we're open?
Let's say economically, isn't it economically viable? Is that what
Okay, okay. Because I think that's the kind of, as a city council, so you need to kind of step back and say, what are the questions people are going to ask? It's kind of the real basic things. Are you looking at new development or not? What are your priorities, I guess? If this covers, that'd be great. I mean, because I'm sure council would be thrilled if we used it.
How is that different than where we're going with the comp plan, other than talking about where we're going to implement?
Yeah, just a little bit more breadth. We're more focused on land use. They're focused on everything, so it's police, it's fire, it's all the services the city provides.
the rest of the
They've got a
comp,
little bit more breadth with their vision statement.
the rest of the comp plan is then, okay, and what are we going to do to reinforce or elaborate or promote that? And that's all you need to say.
Yeah.
I do like the fact that that doesn't say anything about small town.
No, it doesn't. It's true.
It talks about community involvement, it talks about community character and enhancement of life, the quality of life. I can barely read it, but. So yeah, it hits upon a lot of the things that we're trying to do, and it leaves room to expand upon it.
Yeah, whether you're living out toward Beaumar, or living down in the Alta Aspen Grove, or living in downtown, or living in Shady Croft, or wherever else, your vision of Littleton's going to be a little bit different. So why try and focus it onto a single homogeneous viewpoint? People are going to have different perspectives about what Littleton is. The main thing is, it's not just a fading little small town someplace. It's not trying to be downtown Denver, which we're never going to be. But there are elements of all that we can get through the diversity around the city and the opportunities we have throughout the city.
Let me read it to you one more time. It's to preserve a family-oriented and economically vibrant community that encourages citizen involvement, respects diversity, values community character, and enhances the quality of life of Littleton residents and visitors.
No
I
problem
like
with
it.
that.
Cover it. Okay.
They wrote that. Are the notes still around of the talking points that they used to get to that point?
Well, I think
No blending.
they kind of follow, don't they, in those goals?
The goals
I
are
think some of the arguments that happened during that time that we can just not replicate because they've already been defined.
Yeah, I've not seen those. Have you seen the notes from that?
I think
Discussion?
staff probably put it together, and then it was reviewed, and council probably tweaked it, came up with that.
Here's a simple dual question to ask ourselves about that. Is there anything really important that's missing from that? And is there anything in there that really jars with what we've been hearing from the community and what we've researched and discussed for the last 4 or 5 years? And if the answer to both of those questions is no, we're there.
It certainly would lead to approval from city council.
I think they'd be very happy with it.
I'm not trying to blame you.
So you can't criticize it.
I don't mean, sorry, I didn't mean brought one copy tonight, but anyway, we do have one copy. So.
And that vision statement relates to the entire city council's
All the
responsibilities of, fire safety, economics, finances, all that.
Right.
But
Snow removal.
is there anything about that needs to be more directed towards a comprehensive plan which deals with development and growth and I don't
It's all in
see.
there.
Yeah.
I'm reading it all in there.
Yeah.
The only thing I might
20 years, Littleton will be a family-oriented, vibrant community.
It is, in some of our minds, it is now.
Agreed. Yeah.
The only thing I'd quibble with is the family-oriented for fear of what it might say to the people who aren't that way. But let's face it, Littleton is family-oriented. I mean, that's why people come here. I mean, the fact that the school district and the strength of the school district is such a strong factor in motivating people to relocate here says you can't ignore the family orientation aspect of the city.
Good point though, David, because then is that discouraging young people to want to live in Littleton? And that's something that, as we look at higher density, it's the young professionals living next to RTD so that they can commute and still maybe have access to the river or et cetera. So I think it's worth thinking about and saying, does it discourage it or?
It might, to the extent anybody even reads it and is aware of it, help them self-select. The ones who are looking for a place to set down roots and grow professionally, personally, and with the idea of growing a family, that would help us select toward that sort of people. And we've talked in the past about the need for diverse housing opportunities, so you could have people come in when they're singles or they're newly married and they're starting a family and a growing family, and the family moves on and they're empty nesters, And that's consistent with everything we've been talking about. So while a year ago I might have dug my heels in a little bit about the family-oriented, family-focused, I think it's a legitimate parameter to consider when we're talking about Littleton.
Well, I think we've heard enough discussion on this item. I think we go ahead and unless there's any major objections to it, that we adopt that as our revision statement.
I think I do have a concern of does this exclude young people wanting to live here, play here, hang out here?
Could you say multi-generational without adding too many more words
I
to
don't want
this?
to overcomplicate it, because, I mean, it is, family-oriented is very, very important and very critical to everything, but I don't think I don't think any of this speaks to a young person wanting to.
Not going to sound terribly attractive for swinging singles.
What's that?
Say it won't sound terribly attractive for swinging singles, but
Yeah.
they're more likely to be up in the Highlands or downtown Denver or something anyway. But newly married
Why
or
not
partners,
down here? Why not?
to read this?
well, that was my point. That was my preamble, assuming they even read it.
They're not going to read this, and they're not going to read the one that maybe is the plan for the Highlands neighborhood in Denver.
Well, what this is our guide though. So we are going to always orientate ourselves to this vision statement. So if we continue, if we
But
limit
it doesn't say
ourselves.
we're only family oriented. It says we are family oriented. It doesn't say we exclude anyone else. How do you go, then do you go through and add everybody else, every other group? Or you take out family oriented?
Well, I would suggest that the definition of family is also broadened in the last generation or so, where, it's not necessarily the nuclear family. There are different definitions of that. So I don't necessarily think that family-oriented excludes anybody.
I think I agree in it, but I think we're trying to include this post-college crowd, this high school and want to stick around.
The creative.
We can sit here and take the long-term vision. We want to find opportunities, find ways of encouraging the singles who come in to set down roots and then grow, move on to other housing opportunities. But Karina's point is, how do we, if we declare that we're family-oriented, how do we entice them here in the first place to even find that this, as I start thinking about starting a family, this would be a good place to be. I don't know how you answer that.
And actually, that's when I was a young professional, single, and I looked at where do I want to live? And my husband and I were, my husband and I, when we were engaged, we looked at all different cities, and we ended up selecting Littleton. And it was because we saw in the future, if we raised children, that it had the right components there. And so it was attractive. And so I think when I see family-oriented, I think of all ages, that it's attractive for all ages. And ultimately, you want people who will come and settle here and be involved in the community. So it's family-oriented. When I think of that, I think that it's welcome to all ages. When I hear that.
Community for all ages, rather than family-oriented.
I agree with Karina. That's still going to be, maybe not off-putting, but it isn't going to be inviting to the people who are single and have no immediate expectation or even desire to start a family. I don't know what you do about that. I mean, name the first 6 things that come to mind when you think about little activities in Littleton, and tell me one of them that isn't family-oriented,
But what if we were to add the
besides
word,
bars.
the word,
Ready.
just add the word cool? I'm totally, and let the generations debate what cool means. If what is hip, who knows? But cool, and so that it does appeal to those young people that may be family. I have nothing wrong with the word family. We are family.
Will the word cool still be cool 20 years from now?
I don't know.
About wanting to live here. And maybe I don't know that it would use the word cool, but I think that's what I'm looking at this, and I'm saying, okay, there's nothing that's cool or fun and I know people that choose not to live in Littleton because they're like, oh, that's just, families just live there.
at some point, you have to recognize a direction, who's going to be attracted by a direction you're choosing. I'll tell you, I was at the holiday evening on the farm Sunday evening. There were a lot of couples, no children, walking around because of the atmosphere, because of the feeling. So it's not like the family orientation is going to be off-putting, other than to the people who want to party until 3 in the morning.
How about
I don't know.
multi-generational?
Mark, what did you say?
Community for all ages. That was stolen from you.
Has everybody seen the vision statement? Corinne, you still have it?
Sorry,
Keep
I'm
that.
still
sorry.
studying it.
Okay, good.
Still reading.
I'm sorry I only brought one.
By the way,
Community for all ages. I like that.
Is it the objective tonight to all agree this is the final version, or is this just one of 10 revisions that are going to happen in the next 4 or 5 months?
Well, I think we want to,
It's closer.
Yeah, closer, but this ain't final.
Right. We'll revisit all this stuff.
There's a lot to be said about putting that vision statement up there, working through the goals, and then revisiting it.
Right.
And see if it
Yeah.
still says what you want it to say.
Yeah, circle around, but still
Exactly.
moving forward.
Give us directions
Does
to the goals.
Littleton have a tagline?
I'm sorry?
Does Littleton have a tagline?
I know it's going to be cool, one word, cool.
Doesn't have a tagline now. I think
Put money on it.
that's a good idea. The brand is maybe working at one. Yeah, there used to be one for the city. I don't know what it
The
was.
multi-generational thing starts to.
Yeah,
I was trying to do this without that first phrase.
Yeah.
Without the family oriented, just an economically vibrant, and it's missing something.
It's being worked
But
on.
multi-generational, that's
So
just
that
like
eat,
this.
sleep,
Well,
shop.
multi-generational sounds,
Something simple.
I'm just not sure how you fit that phrase.
Protect the goal.
multi-generational is planneries talk. Community for all ages,
Not very well.
or community for the ages, yeah.
Part of this whole strategy.
I guess the other word in there that bugs me a little bit is the preserve, that being the first word of that. Does that indicate something, the word preserve? Or should it be encourage or support or something along those lines? Or
I think that's a real critical one. Is everybody hearing Craig's
Yeah.
comment? Because I think
Yeah.
if we just focus on preserve, I don't think we're talking about the vitality, the diversity, the evolution that we may be.
saying we like it the way it is and it
We
should
are open
change.
to some new stuff.
So,
Well, something that really just zinged me, David, you said 5 minutes ago, and that is the tugging competition. Let's call it tugging between vibrant community with a small town character. And that was like, whoa, that's what my 20 years here have been.
Yeah, I don't really think it was tugging. I like to think of it as merging or.
Merging? Okay. Okay, not competing, but merging. How do you merge the two?
I like the fact that it feels small town, but there's a lot to do, and a lot of different people. So I think that, I see that as a synthesis, as the diversity that we've been talking about. I don't see it as competition at all.
Yeah, tugging's not the right word, but
Right.
maybe merging's not the right word either.
No, somewhere in between.
And, maybe just the word and.
So, trying to just add that community of all ages, so if you take out to preserve at the beginning, a family oriented, and just with the vision statement being Littleton is an economically vibrant community for all ages that encourages citizen involvement, respects diversity, values, maybe instead of community character, because we've used community before, again, coming back to small town values, and enhances the quality of life. So maybe it's just taking out this preserve family oriented as the starting point, and the starting point is an economically vibrant community for all ages, and then it continues.
Or take your phrase right up, put it right up front. Littleton is a community for all ages, economically vibrant, encouraging citizen involvement, etc. Because that's the heart of it.
And sneaking the word cool.
I love that. Put it on the tag.
Dave, there's the,
You said Duluth is a cool city.
We're not.
Have you ever seen those shirts?
No. You're looking at the wrong side.
How many times you say it, it just doesn't look cool.
Or like Austin, keep Austin weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Boston
yeah.
weird?
Weird.
That's their slogan.
so is there any consensus here? Are we heading in any,
We proposed 2 different ways to integrate community for all ages, either as the first couple of words or right after vibrant.
Get rid of preserve.
Get rid of
So
preserve.
get rid of preferred and get rid of family oriented.
Rather than select a narrow verb or try and squeeze 2 or 3 in there, just leave the verb out altogether.
Yep. Okay. For the record, I do think having cool in there is a good idea.
Work the cool in there.
I'm dead serious, that
No, I
it
agree.
creates an ongoing discussion 20 years from now of what do those hoops mean? And to the point that it drives, and it gives that second box to check, which is, does this need a hit sign?
See that word cool deeper in the document, but somewhere, I think we can get the word cool in.
In the first 3 pages.
John Bracken would like Trinity to come in there too.
Hip?
Hip and
Okay.
Trinity. Hip and Trinity.
He'd also like the word mustache. And I hope he's listening.
A diversity of mustache.
Okay.
I do say something for cool is, a lot of these all kind of sound the same after a while. And if you check something that's
Yes,
going
I
to
agree.
stick in somebody's head,
I agree.
that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, this could be any city.
You don't like eccentric better than cool?
Okay, you can get a more highfalutin
That's eccentric.
word that really means cool, but sounds light or ease.
Sounds cooler.
Cooler than cool.
Ice cold is cooler than cool.
Cool has been around.
You want to take a shot at reading back what you heard?
So what I heard was, we're gonna get rid of the verb first and just say a
Community for all ages.
vibrant community for, oh boy, a community for all ages, that encourages citizen involvement, respects diversity.
Drop the economic.
Don't drop the economic vibrant.
Okay. Community for all ages that is economically vibrant,
Yeah.
encourages citizen
Yeah.
involvement, respects diversity, values community character, and enhances quality of life for Littleton residents and visitors. Somewhere to stick cooler.
The only thing that's rubbing me is we're using community twice.
Before economic vibrant, they say cool, economically vibrant, so.
We're using the word community twice.
Are we?
No, actually, he didn't, not the way he rephrased it. He said a community for all ages, economically vibrant, that is economically vibrant, encourages, so he left out the second community.
Yeah.
No, the community's on the second line, community character.
Oh, community character. We can change that. Yeah, we can do that.
Why don't you say besides?
Does any other town in town have a, welcome to Golden where the West lives, do they run with that? Is that a guiding principle?
I don't.
That sounds like more like a branding tagline.
Yeah, I think so too.
Before we leave the vision statement, there's one, I guess, does residents and visitors capture everybody?
I like that.
I'm thinking of people who work here, have businesses.
Living there.
Residents and visitors.
You could
I guess if you're working here, you're visiting here, right?
Dennis is a visitor.
I think if you want to be,
A long-term visitor.
Long-term visitor, but visitor. Yeah, I think employees would be helpful. I think, yeah, I agree. Shoppers, I don't know. I think we probably.
They could be
include those.
visitors. I could see them as visitors.
Yeah, I think you might want to pull them out just to give credence.
To be concise, you just leave it off. You stop with quality of life.
You know, I know people who have worked in Littleton for a long time, and even though they live outside of Littleton, think of Littleton as home.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think residents and visitors pretty much covers it.
Okay.
What I liked about visitors, it really opened up my mind. Like, it made me listen to, like, oh, it's not just about us who live here, it's about the people that experience Littleton.
Look at the number of people who kept writing in on the, or weighing in on the
don't
website who think of themselves as being a resident of Littleton, and they live 2 miles away.
Right.
One way or the other.
Right.
So,
Well, and a third of the calls we get at our office are from people who think they live in Littleton and don't.
right.
So, and there's an advantage to that, really. I mean, having people identify with this.
And the majority of people at Western Welcome were not residents of Littleton.
But they think of Littleton as home nonetheless.
Okay, so there's I think we have some consensus on that one, so let's get into the goals.
Good. So, again, what we've done is we've kind of taken the conversations we've been having and summarized them with this initial statement. Build upon key assets is really the goal. And then, and I'm not sure, I'm not comfortable that's necessarily the right phrasing that we want, the right format, but build upon it, key assets, and then the language after that gets into more detail. Because there's so much that's gone behind this. But again, I think we need a catchphrase, and we need that the elevator speech that we can really consolidate this. And I think that does it. In this case, Littleton will respect and enhance its key assets, including its small-town character, strong sense of community, healthy economy, vital employment base, beautiful river, creeks, lakes, parks, and trails, desirable neighborhoods, historic structures and districts, exciting schools, vibrant community college, inviting retail centers, the well-respected Littleton Adventist Hospital, ready access to surrounding communities, well-located light rail stations, and picturesque mountain views.
Catch your breath, that's a little too long.
A little bit of everything that we heard, yes, again, so.
So I think before we start on, going deep into each of them, the way I look at this statement, so after we define this vision, then it's, we will do this by,
Right.
we should be able to list the 3 to 5 things, it shouldn't be more than 5. We will do this by, and I think most of these can finish that sentence, by focusing on sustainability, by treating the river as the most valuable asset, by, so I think it's first finding those 3 to 5,
Good.
and then providing the depth behind them. But we have to make sure those 3 to 5 come back to the vision statement.
Right.
Either that or make it short and sweet. Vision, right now it's 2 lines by the time we get finished. The goals, maybe have to break it up a little bit so it doesn't go on. But after that, it's, and how are we going to deliver on those goals? And that's where you get into the essentials, the sustainability. River is a valuable asset and that sort of thing. But those are really how you deliver on those goals, how you realize those
Sound
goals.
like objectives,
Well, they are.
right? So.
But what you're talking about is the means of realizing those goals, those objectives.
I'm trying to figure out where are we going to focus.
I mean, if our first comment was Dennis was running out of breath reading the goal statement, to then look at expanding it rather than recognizing that we're now talking about not just the goals, but what are the means and the elements essential to realizing.
Well, I guess I would say the goal really is that catchphrase, the build upon key assets. I think that's your goal. And focus on sustainability is your second. In this case, I think using Karina's format, focusing on sustainability, building on key assets, treating the river as the keys most valuable, and then the rest of that is really more explanatory. So, we can break it up into bullets or something else, but it's trying to make it even on the page as concise as possible. So that's why. But I don't want to lose too many of the thoughts that we've heard over all the forums and through all the conversations we've had and online. Yeah.
This is the City of Golden's comp plan that I forgot to return to you. And they have value themes, accessible and walkable. Then they have a mission statement. We value being a community which is walkable, bikeable, and accessible to all. Then goal number 1. We will provide safe, convenient, well-maintained biking and walking opportunities appropriate for all ages and ability level. And then they have 10 strategy points underneath there that organizes this very methodically. And so I think that sort of yes-ands a little bit of what you were saying.
Something missing in between the vision and the goals.
Okay.
Yeah, I would call them guiding principles.
We have principles which we developed, and I can work on that. And Glenn and I were talking about, we've been talking about incorporating those between the two. So that was our thought as well, is we needed something.
Transformative actions, that's what I thought was missing. And I don't know if you, at the last meeting, actually defined what those were. It was catalytic. At the last meeting, that was like one of the things we were going to create. What are those transformative actions that the city can move forward on?
And they really became the goals in some cases.
Okay.
Yeah, like treating the river as the most valuable resource. Yeah, it was that kind of seeking catalytic development.
Yeah, treating the river as the most valuable resource, I think was the strongest I think, consensus for a catalytic or transformative project.
Maybe it's just that number one is what's throwing everybody off, build on assets, whereas all the other goals, it's basically saying that.
I think,
Other assets.
I think what Karina was saying is somewhere between the vision and then to the goals is, okay, what is it, what are the essential principles? What are the essential directions, the motivations? What is it that you're going to use to define the assets, the goals, the means of achieving them, whatever? What are the principles you're going to hold inviolate in trying to go from the overall goal, the vision, to the individual goals? And then after that, yeah, I see now what you're saying, that first one about the assets, that's saying, here's what we have to work with. Then the next step is, what do we do with those things that we have to work with?
Like, what are the strategies?
Mhm.
Different than tactics, right?
Right.
So tactics can be many, but what is then the strategy of how we're going to achieve that vision? And then the goals becomes the objectives.
I guess the challenge is going to be, the way we've been hoping to get this in final format is to have it as brief as possible. So, so if we can come up with those strategies for each of these goals or something a little bit more than this, but I think we break it down to every one of the items that's underneath each of those goals, it becomes really unwieldy and very redundant at some point in what we're trying to accomplish.
Dennis, I mean, one strategy could have 3 goals attached to it. So it doesn't
Okay.
necessarily mean that each goal has a strategy. So there may
Okay.
be a strategy that we outline that addresses, goal number 2, 4, and 5, right?
Mhm.
That's what we achieve out of that strategy.
Okay.
So I don't think it has to be a match for a match.
And we were about there about 3 years ago. So what we tried to do was match up, after we got through the vision, and then recognize the fundamental principles that were going to infuse whatever we did. We started talking about goals, and then what are the 2 or 3 key things we can do or need to do to achieve those goals? Allowing for the fact that sometimes they're going to overlap. A strategy taken to achieve one goal is going to help enhance the chances of achieving another goal. There's nothing wrong with that.
Should you begin with the end in mind and say, we know this strategy will have been successful, or we will be successful when the following things manifest?
I think we
Is
have
that
that
too
in
specific for this?
Well, to me, I think in some cases you can almost assume your goal's going to be it. Your goal's going to be your end product.
You either reach it or you don't.
Yeah, in some ways you can kind of say that is my goal. That's the end of this, and how do I get there?
And if one of the principles we're talking about is making sure that each of those goals should reinforce each other. You shouldn't be in conflict. Whatever you do to achieve one goal successfully should one way or another have a beneficial effect or a rub-off effect on your other goals. If they're not meshed, if they're not self-reinforcing or mutually reinforcing, you've probably taken a flyer someplace, gone off in a direction you didn't want to go.
A specific example, the Ensor property. We know we will have been successful, and take the bias of style and design out of it. We know we will be successful when what happens?
When you have merged what's going along on the west edge of the property, where it's more bucolic and open space and recreational, with the high traffic flow and visibility on the eastern edge along the road, and you found uses and a mix of uses and transitions in the property in between that draws from and gives back to both of those, both the river and the highway. If it's just retail-oriented focus to the highway, you've missed a major opportunity. If it's just open space and you've ignored the traffic and the visibility going back and forth, you've missed an opportunity.
So then complete the same sentence. We will, let's just accept it as a given. Let's treat the river, so what you just answered. Focus on sustainability. We will, if that's part of our vision, focus on sustainability. We will be successful in focusing on sustainability when we see what?
See existing properties being repurposed rather than leveled and paved over or built over would be one example. Help me, Janet.
Well, also, you're growing food.
Sorry, I was on
Yeah, local food, you're producing energy, you're reducing waste. So you're looking at your resources, water, you're using your water wisely. So looking at all the resources and how do we multiply them within our community so that they're more abundant to support more people.
And as your demographics shift, you don't have houses standing empty because they're no longer suitable for a particular lifestyle, but we've made our building code, our zoning code flexible enough that people can adapt those to extended families or that sort of thing.
So
That's sustainability, that's sustainable.
where I hear you going, Andrew, is that
Recycled materials.
the goal itself should really state what that end product is. You know,
Our goal
the
is to win the
success.
Super Bowl.
Right, exactly. How do we get there? That's right.
First of all, we need to
Yeah.
Right?
It has to be
True.
measurable. It comes back to, how do you measure and know whether or not you achieve that goal?
And it has to be something we can actually do.
Right. As a city, instead of.
As a city.
Instead of a region or federal government or.
Instead of dropping pennies in the wishing well.
We will be successful when the South Platte River Corridor has an abundant number of businesses with great views of the river and a nice mix between the natural landscape as well as the establishments.
Or more succinctly, when the uses between the river and the highway draw from and enhance each, both at the same time. Not one or the other, not one turning its back on the other.
I go back to what a comprehensive plan is used for. Really, the only people that read them are developers coming in to try to do a land use change or a zoning change or a...
Employers look at it too.
Employers look at
And
it,
then
but,
citizens
And citizens.
reaction, yeah.
but a lot of the comp plans I've seen, I know we're trying to be shorter and more concise, but a lot of them are broken down by open space, transportation, housing, economic development, I guess. And then under those, like you just read, for example, open space, a goal would be to have connectivity throughout the city. And then you have strategies of how you're going to get there. And you get more and more specific as you get deeper and deeper. And then when you really get a comprehensive plan that's thorough, those strategies move into a capitalization plan, and you put numbers to them for budget purposes, and the city can actually project what it would take to implement some of these strategies. And those are definitely measurable by dollars. We're not going to go there on this. But I don't see the organization relating it to more development or community development criteria, open space, land use, transportation. Not that has to be that way, but I agree that we need some organization, some breakdown of hierarchy, like you mentioned already, where you have a goal, and then you break that down into a strategy that is measurable so that someone who comes in and says, okay, I want to improve this property here, first I got to look at the comp plan to see what the vision for this particular sub-area might be. And then that one strategy might be that the western edge and the eastern edge have some connectivity or relationship in terms of design and physical connectivity in terms of sidewalks and access. So those are things that a developer can look at and say, okay, does my plan fulfill that strategy? Therefore, the city council is more likely to approve it because I've met their criteria. That's how I view it from a planning point of view. Now, that gives people something to sink their teeth into as they try to implement development in the city. So I'd like to see goals, strategies, and then measurable criteria. Whether or not these are the actual goals that are best, I don't know. I see number 8 and number 1 is almost the same thing. Connect the city's activity areas, and then what are the assets? Well, the assets are these wonderful activity areas. They're kind of the same thing, so there's some of that overlap there.
And like 1 and 3 would be an overlap.
Right. My printout, what is the title for number 3? I didn't get a title on mine.
Treat the river as the city's most valuable resource.
Oh, somehow it got cut off. Yeah.
Sorry.
I think it's still a monumental task to try to organize this. We're at that point where we're really getting down to the specifics.
And yet, I'm going to draw on two things. One that Andrew said, and one from Karina. At least I think that's where I'm going. Maybe I'm reinterpreting, so jump in. Karina's essentially saying it needs to say what we need to say, the essentials, but it's got to be approachable. It's got to be something somebody's going to read and grasp. Most people aren't going to read more than a couple pages. What Andrew's saying, I think, is whatever we establish in the way of goals or strategies, the evidence of success and the main elements of success have got to be apparent in those descriptions. And what that really says to me is somebody reading this, and I don't care whether it's a citizen looking to explore Littleton as a future home or an employer or a business, they ought to be able to look at that, and when they start getting into the detail that we develop in the hierarchy you're talking about, or move on to the zoning maps or the zoning ordinance, there's nothing they see in the detail that wasn't predictable from what they were seeing here. Everything's consistent. This is the basics, 10 words or less, but anything we develop in the way of detail is perfectly consistent with that, and every person moving from the summary to the detail is going to say, well, of course. Or, yeah, I don't know why I didn't. Yeah, I can see where they'd go with that. There's got to be a flow, and this is the place where we set that pattern.
Yeah, to get to that, I sketched out words just as we were talking, and I think you're absolutely on this path now. Vision, mission, values, goals, strategies, tactics, and then tasks. And I don't think our job in the comp plan, Randy, I think this is where you were illustrating, is to get to tasks. That's let guys like you do that.
Other than the ones that the city alone can do. Streets and establishing
Building
community paths and that sort, right.
Setting up buildings.
But even that, I think, is in the annual, budget work program for the individual departments, right? Yeah,
Right. And so, what's our goal? What are the strategies we're going to get there? And maybe that's where we cut it off. Mm-hmm. And let that be open for the interpretation of what this means.
So would you read your categories one more time?
So vision, mission, values.
Okay. Slow down. Is that 1? That's 3.
No, it's 3.
Okay, good.
Vision, and the branding people, Glenn, should be doing this. And if you're not, you should get a different branding company. Vision, mission, values, goals, strategies, tactics.
Okay.
And then under that is tasks.
Okay.
But I don't think we should get to tasks.
Say tactics are like implementation. Implementation.
So the goal, I'm going to make this up, and I'm probably going to screw it up. The goal is to treat the river as the most valuable asset. The strategies would be David's comment of making the retail and the natural landscape appropriately blend into each other. That there would be a river tube shuttle that will go up and down and give 13-year-olds a safe way to travel and play. Actually, that sounds like a cool idea. And so those would be the strategies that we would do, and then the tactics is we need to create a shuttle infrastructure that would then run around the school. We need to update the zoning to be appropriate for retail on the first floor, mixed use on the second floor, and always require direct ties to the natural landscape.
Reevaluate what zoning will allow. Right?
Basically, tactics is implementation. Like this is the
Things, a task list,
Yes.
not the tasks themselves,
But
a
generic
task list of things that should get done in order to support the strategy.
And are different elements of that directed towards different audiences? Do you think that vision is the broader audience and the narrower the audience gets, the farther down the list they go in terms of...
Above vision would probably be tagline.
Okay.
And Littleton, a walkable city. Duluth, a cool city, right? then the vision
Bound to get
is sort of where you've started here. And I think that's an appropriate vision statement. And they call them here, they go vision statement, and then they have goals, which I'll assume that's what they meant. And then underneath the goals, they laid objectives. And so objectives in this dialogue would be the same as strategies.
Right.
Right. But what I think you have started here are really that mission values level. This is sort of the, after the vision, it's sort of the general narrative about where the plan's going to take us before you get into those more specific goals. I think that's the way I'm reading this. So this is a good start in the sense that it's sort of the introduction to the plan. It gets you introduced to those goals, and then I tend to agree with Randy's point that they need to be organized into more planning categories, what people would be used to looking for in a comp plan, because most cities do it that way. And so, a sophisticated developer is going to just open the plan and look for land use goals or look for open space goals or whatever. So there's, 4 or 5 categories there. Maybe it's economic development, but it's below this. This is that sort of preamble.
And most are laid out that way, and I think it
Are or
means
are
something.
not?
They are that set up by category. I guess my complaint is it doesn't really tell a story to the average Joe. So it's kind of written towards that developer, that planner, that's looking for something about transportation. So they'll go to transportation versus talking about what all the elements of a community and how you blend them together to create a unique place.
If we presented this whole thing to the community as a whole, what's going to happen is, as they read down through it, you're going to drop people off. Not because you're boring them, not because it's too complicated, just because, okay, I've seen what I've seen and heard what I wanted to see, and now I know where I'm getting into. Somebody else is going to want to get a little farther into it as far as not just the goals, but the strategies. When you get down to the developer level, maybe the employer level, but probably just the developer level, they're going to be more concerned about tactics in terms of what kind of heads up it gives to them when they start trying to put a business plan together. And then they're going to leap immediately from that to the details of the zoning map and the zoning ordinance. I think my caution is going to be our effort ought to be starting at the top and then peaking right as we drop from goals into strategies. If we get bogged down in trying to develop 4 or 5 tactics for everything, which is where we got into trouble 3 years ago. The more we start focusing on tactics as specifics, the harder it's going to be to wrap this up.
Right, and that's I think, where the strategies comes in, because it's a little bit higher level to say the strategy would be to relook at zoning to support this type of vision or et cetera, and then what zoning changes that happens.
And it may be nothing more than looking at the strategy and saying, here is the kind of tactic to follow up on that strategy that the city can follow. Here's the kind of tactics that private business should follow, and leave it at that. Not details, but just here's the fork in the road. Here's what the city can do. Here's what private business.
Because tactics need to be able to change over time and over circumstances. But what has to hold true or over time or stand the test of time comes back to the vision, and that's clear. The goals, because then if you keep changing that, then you'll never reach those goals. And then the strategies that help you to get there. Otherwise, you just keep
Take revitalization of retail, I'm not even sure I want to call it centers, retail areas. Somewhere between strategies that we can conceive and tactics that we can suggest or propose, we need to step back and say, okay, we've set the direction, we've got some things that we think can move that, but we're not going to tell you the details of how to do this.
I agree that you need to stop at the higher level and use words like connectivity and access and not put a sidewalk here.
Yep.
And that leaves it makes the plan more, have more life to it, timeline. Because that way you're not locking yourself into something that might change.
I've got a practical caution about that, and that is the farther we get from goals to strategy into individual tactics, the harder it's going to be to hold to those basic principles that we establish up front. and we start compromising and say, well, I know we said we're going to do this as a basic principle, but wait, what we really need to do for this tactic is try this. And you start getting inconsistencies. An inconsistent comprehensive plan is worse than none at all.
But that's why
It basically crosses the line from what to how.
Right.
If that's
Well,
what you're-
yeah, and the details of how.
As I'm looking here, they stop at objectives, and again, I think there should be more under this, but the bottom one on there, preserve and create a quality community, the bottom thing says, maintain and enhance public art. And the very next question is, what does that mean? But
That's okay.
That's great.
That's
Good.
okay.
Situation. Yeah.
To the extent that we can propose strategies or even tactics that are consistent with the principles and clearly directed toward the goals and the vision that we've established, great. But when it starts descending into the kind of detail where somebody says, well, wait a minute, I don't see how that's really you're in trouble.
And
That's why we were in trouble 2 years ago.
That's why we have to really spend our time on making sure we get those other pieces so perfect, so that, again, the tactics can live on, and they can change, but then the strategy still stays whole. I mean, that's where the time and effort.
We have a downtown plan, we have a historic district plan, we have different plans that have already gotten into the nitty-gritty details of how to do these areas. And we may need sub-area plans to put under this later for different areas like the Broadway corridor, which you've already done.
As I was driving between meetings.
Needs to be redone.
Right.
Yeah.
This man.
As I was driving between meetings this evening, which is why I was late, I kept thinking of a quote that I'd seen a couple times, I mean, not just in one context, but in 2 or 3 of the last couple of months. And I don't remember whether it was an artist who said it or a planner, but basically he was saying that a plan is complete not when you can't add anything more to it, but when you can't strip anything else away from it. And I think our mistake over the last several years has been sins of accretion. We keep throwing this in, throwing that in, expanding on this. If we can get the front end that we're really talking about now with the vision, mission, values, and goals, get that done, then everything else ought to dictate itself.
It's the little stuff that confuses people, that loses people, and gets
And when you get
outdated.
into conflict.
Gets outdated
And
quickly.
we'll be able to
Yeah,
come up with
right.
all that. I mean,
Oh, sure, give us enough time. And we can generate all sorts of stuff.
I gotta go.
Sins of excretions?
Accretion.
Accretion.
You keep adding this. If this is a nice pile, it'd be nice to put that on there.
I'm sure what he was talking about, I wasn't going to say anything.
It's a PG show.
So does that discussion fit with where you were going with this, Dennis, as far as just this being sort of the preamble, but then we're going to build upon it to give it teeth?
Right,
Okay.
absolutely. And we just want to get that upper level so we know where we're going. So
What's the
are we
level
on
of
the right
detail?
head? And we might even, all this detail after this is kind of what we take away from the goals. So we leave those first statements, I think, take these away, turn those more into the strategies. So it gets into more detail. But that's what we're going to try and fit within that. We're trying to get the categories, I think, at this point, and seeing if we're covering everything with our goals. So we should be all-inclusive.
Let's get back to that question about categories, because I don't know if we had sort of a consensus on whether we do need to break it down into land use and
Yeah, I've got the same
economics.
concern Glenn does, I think, is that it
Becomes kind of sterile.
it does become sterile, becomes very, it's what everybody does, but it really becomes what everybody does. And it's a pretty boring little text. It does become more of a reference document. Depends on what we want it to be, I guess. But if we want it to be an inspiration, if we want it to be a vision, then I think it maybe needs to be more of a story, like Glenn says. So,
Well, give you an example. If one of the things we're talking about in values or principles, whatever, is reaffirming the buffering transition or whatever you want to call it between uses, okay? That applies as much to zoning districts as it does to plan development plans that come in with mixed uses on there. We don't have to list each of them separately. The basic principle is the same, whether it's applied on a macro or a micro scale is irrelevant.
right.
Right. Yeah, I'm just afraid, okay, you want to reuse the shopping center for a mixed use. Now I'm looking at transportation, I'm looking at land use, I'm looking at how to build a diverse community in another chapter versus kind of the capsule in one area.
stick to the principles, make sure you've looked ahead to the kinds of situations that come up and establish the principles that then are applicable to that, whether on the small scale or the larger scale.
Yeah,
Whether within a development or between the development and the existing surroundings.
There have been 5 different plans for the Cherry Creek neighborhood, over the years. And we're now on number 5. I worked on 3 and 4. 3, we kept really, really simple. 4, we got into far too much detail. And 4 is useful to some degree, but the one that really was inspirational was 3, because it was short. It was really, it captured people. You could get through it quickly, and it's the one you really wanted to work with.
I started out.
And you could interpret what that vision was and say, in this case, it's really where we want to go.
So when you get down to the level of goals and strategies, are they organized on the basis of a theme then? I mean, if it's not organized under transportation, land use, I mean, how does it follow? What does it follow, I guess is the question. And maybe we need to look at the Cherry Creek plan to get an example.
Well, you'll have to find the third one. Yeah, they tend to be. I mean, I think we could do it either way. I mean, or we can cross-reference it too. Sometimes you can do that. To say if you're looking for land use, here's what you want to know. But it's how do you think it's going to be most effective and who your audience is? And I agree that largely the audience tends to be developers and property owners and staff and elected officials. But it's very easy, like Glenn says, to miss the big picture when you go in and really focus on just...
With one glaring exception to that. And that is anytime somebody proposes a different development in an established community, the first thing the citizens do is say, what does the comp plan give us to use to fight that?
Right.
Okay, so you got to keep that in mind.
Right.
I mean, we had talked at one point about doing the overall comp plan and drawing from that the general principles, goals, guidelines, whatever, and then go out to the community and start worrying about the little small area plans where you have slightly different attitudes about what they are willing to accommodate in the way of dynamic change from a nearby neighborhood. But that is the tail, and it's not the tail that wags the dog. That is, here are the basic principles. Okay, there are going to be some variations here and there, localized variations, and that's acceptable because it's still going to be reflective of the principles and the vision that we have. But make that the not an afterthought. Make it here's a way to particularize the overall plan for this particular situation.
The citizens may look at the comp plan and use it as a weapon, but the city also uses it to verify that the developer is doing what the city wants them to do.
I guess I shouldn't have said weapon. I meant more as defense. If the people in an existing neighborhood, Aberdeen Village, for example, had been led to expect through the comprehensive plan that these things were going to be protected, these things would be encouraged, they want to make sure that anything new that's proposed in there is going to be consistent with that. And to the extent that reasonable people can come to a reasonable meeting of the minds that the new plan basically is consistent, rather than trying to game the system.
And I believe that it can be used either way you want to use it, because it's going to be vague enough to where you're going to interpret it the way you want to interpret it.
This is going to sound facetious, and I don't mean it as such. Do developers really read these?
Yes.
Or do they look for the individual line items that are most representative of what they wanted to do in the first place?
Yes.
Their planners read them.
They sure do.
As a planner, I go straight to the comp plan and I say, do I meet that objective, and that objective, and I explain why.
And as an architect, screw the comprehensive plan. I go to the zoning code and then backtrack and maybe look at the comprehensive plan for tidbits that'll let me fight for what I
you
want
always
to do.
have a project in mind, though.
Well,
The
the developer does.
Look at a comprehensive plan and say, what would be a good thing to develop?
His client does.
Right.
His client does.
You always have a project to start with.
Where can
And
I
the city
go?
does the same thing. The city says, have they met this criteria, and this
Right.
criteria?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And then-
so we can give you a recommendation.
Right.
We have to justify that.
So it's got to be vague enough so everybody can use it the way they want.
Well, it's got to be big enough. it's got to be clear enough that people who have no idea what we're talking about get behind it.
I prefer to think of it as universally,
Care less about land.
universally applicable, not vague enough. I mean, it is, whatever is stated in there is going to be merely supported by what follows. Nothing's going to change.
It should be one big drill down.
Right.
It's a Constitution, not a Bill of Rights.
Right.
And then the 50,000 pages of IRS regulations.
Right.
No, sorry, that's where we can.
And that vision statement should help you make those decisions and help that interpretation. That if you're really sticking to a vision statement that's really clear, you're going to have a pretty good idea of which way to interpret it.
I'm going to go back to what I said about 20 minutes ago. The bottom line is, nobody reading down through the end of the detail that we develop into the zoning ordinance, if they remember what's said in the vision statement and the values, nobody should ever come across anything in that greater detail that says, wait a minute, that's not consistent.
That's right.
It ought to be self-evident.
Right there is a good goal and strategy,
Yeah.
because we do have those. We have a
Isn't
vision, and we can't get there with the tools we got.
Isn't it amazing how in the Constitution or Bill of Rights, you can take 5 words and build an entire, body of law and judge. Just words can be built upon however you want to build upon them.
I just, going back to this organizational structure item, I pulled out the Fort Collins plan. I know we had decided it's a lot more in-depth than where we want to be with this. And, there were 100 consultants involved in it and all, but they did it interesting the way they organized it, and they have little icons that make it kind of fun to follow. They focused on economic health as one, environmental health, community and neighborhood livability, safety and wellness, culture, parks and recreation, high-performing community, and transportation.
So those sound like principles that they're using?
So those are sort of the, it's the organizational structure.
Organizational chapters.
And there's icons, so, a goal could be associated with one of those or maybe more than one of those, so there could be cross-referencing.
So those symbols end up at the end of the goal.
Yeah.
This fits transportation.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And then as you start developing the strategies and all that sort of thing, you can sit there and say, well, this icon and that icon attached to that because this strategy is going to promote
Yeah, and you still get the blending of those systems.
And it kind of follows on, I think, with what we were talking about as far as the vision, the livability, the idea of livability, community livability is in there, and I think it's important to them.
And I think in the bottom line with our mind mixer, we asked a bunch of varied questions, but they all fell into one of those categories. And they were real clear that that's a transportation question, that's a housing type question. With that in mind, and everything will fall in those categories. I guess what I hate to see is splitting the ideas up into those systems, and you kind of lose the composition, I guess.
And at one point, we were headed in that direction. We were trying to develop the vision, the feel of an area, and then say, of all the elements that need building form, transportation, pedestrian access, how do those work together to create that feel for that particular area, rather than just treat circulation system and parks.
Yeah.
Talk about what you're trying to create, and then figure out which elements you have to pull in, and maybe which ones you have to tweak a little bit different, uniquely for that area as opposed to another.
You certainly have to make sure you've covered all those
Right.
categories, yeah, that everything's addressed.
I think your
I like
point,
what you're talking about, is that you've established this menu, essentially, of elements that you have to coordinate. And then the discussion, the guts of it is, how do you pull this together? What's the strategy for mixing those to give you what you're looking for?
and I hear your rationale that all these, you can't look at these items separately, that there's so many of them are integrated. Economic vitality and the availability of open space, or, land use and transportation. They're all so closely linked that you can't really separate them.
And we're going to...
Oh, sorry.
We're going to find ourselves split sometimes. Randy said something about connecting all the parks and all that. Okay, a lot of the parks ought to be connected, but when you're talking about a park that's just a refuge for an area, maybe you don't want to connect it. You want it to be serving that particular area, and it's a place for them to go and get away. There isn't it isn't the Highland Canal with people constantly jogging or bicycling up and down. So our strategies need to be, we need both kinds.
Both, yeah.
How do we mix them? How do we find the balance?
Is it ever done in a matrix format? And I think, if I
yeah.
heard you right, Craig, this is what it is, where we focus on the ideas and don't worry about which box they go in? And then say treat the river as a resource which serves economic development, which serves sustainability, serves family friendly, and serves open space, and just kind of reference where we go.
That'd probably be a better planning tool for us and for staff in future in developing tactics and that sort of thing. The icon business of a quick reference for the bulk of the people who are going to be looking at it might be a little more accessible, adjustable, because they're going to get lost in a matrix.
For the planners, I don't know if this is even reasonable, for the planners, make a sort by category version of it, and for the layman, make a sort by ideas category of it.
Having that matrix available, if we're saying it's for us as a planning tool, organizing tool, for staff as a way of rechecking, no reason the developers couldn't have access to the same thing. It's a good transition point.
As long as it's kept simple. It's got to be kept simple.
Is there going to be a web-based tool, or is it going to be a physical document?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, that could be the future, is it's electronic. I mean, you can sort it any way you want to.
Gee.
I don't know that we're there yet.
We'll be able to bring it up on our
It could be three-dimensional, even four-dimensional. No, it sounds facetious, but I'm serious.
What's the wave of the future of these things?
I think to be online and absolutely as interactive as possible, and so you can actually update it more quickly. I think we're going to have some kind of hard copy. Yeah, the simple version. There's going to be a core of it that's hard copy, but I think we certainly expand upon that.
Dream big, but come back to earth.
Well, let's define our goals,
Plug in your request.
let's define our strategies, and then
Yeah,
we'll,
that's a
then,
future.
I mean, it's an important step. It has to be accessible. I mean, whatever we write on paper, if you can't follow it, understand the logic, then it's useless. So I get the value of it, but I think we have to kind of set those from the onset.
Okay, so there's one, go ahead, Randy. So,
I was just going to affirm what you were saying, Glenn, about every other comp plan breaks it down into planner terms and use transportation, housing. And it would be fun or interesting or creative to try to come up with a more holistic or a vision comp plan that, sustainability relates to everything. Economic development or catalytic development or whatever you want to term it could apply to every project, from the marathon site as a whole to a small 2-acre development somewhere else. I mean, sustainability or economic development ideas could be phrased so that they're not scale specific. I mean, it's just the idea of creating projects that foster growth or development or revenue or community or whatever it might be.
I'll give you a real pithy example. You like that? I didn't say pithy, I'm sorry. A real pithy example on where categorizing things like circulation and parks and all that breaks down. And that is when you start trying to talk about how you integrate all those into meeting the goal of providing more resident-oriented retail, like for the downtown area. How do you then explain that you have to have a certain density in order to develop the market opportunity for that, and what that does to traffic and everything else? If you're doing everything by categories, it's hard to bring it all together and have somebody looking at it say, okay, if I'm already living downtown, but I want a little, I want a butcher, baker, candlestick maker, that sort of thing, the only way they're going to be interested in locating down there is if there are more rooftops. And that means more density, maybe more height. I'm going to have to make a choice. But if you're categorizing it, separate categories, it's hard to bring all that together in one place. we've got to recognize the interfaces between these elements. And that's why the idea of having the icons and bringing them in, and then a short explanation of how these have to work together.
You know, in a certain sense, as I start to look at these goals, there actually are categories. You know, if it's a phrase, but when you think of, like, for example, 1, assets, 2, sustainability, 3, river as resource. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like expenditures, revenue, development. There's actually key terms in here that infill, sense of community, activity areas. So they're not your typical categories. It seems like it's a more artful way to approach it rather than a common term that we use a lot just as a general term. So it seems like we're getting, in some sense, stuck on some of the organizational standpoint, but yet in the goals, there's some clear key words that, to me, when I look at this, that's what it's specifically talking about. And so then in a certain sense in these goals, then it becomes, well, what key terms then are missing in the goals that I would want to see or that we've been hearing from the community. So, and one of the things is outdoors. There's a lot of outdoor activities. It seems like the outdoor Littleton seems to have gotten a lot of attention. So anyway, in what this Dennis and Glenn have put together, I guess in a certain sense now that really realize it's just a more artful way of organizing the city's translating the vision, then it does become, these are, in a certain sense, if we work with the goals, these are our guides, these are our key words as to what goes in. So to keep that in mind.
I'm betting that if each of us sat down with this list, not just the 8 headings, but the detail, the elaboration on there, each of us would come up with a different arrangement of those essential ideas as to whether they are values, goals, or strategies. Because this is a mix. You read through that, it is a mix. And to the extent that we can take, well, say, take paragraph 3. My bet is you've got values, goals, and strategies in there. So pick out what the overall goal is.
I think
develop a couple of the major strategies from that.
I guess the way I'm looking at it is just the caps, just that first heading there, that's just the caps is what may all be on the same level. I'm not sure if they are, but those are, I think, what Jenny, you were talking about as far as capturing a key word out of each one of those, but it's just in that first caps area. It's not reading that whole paragraph because then you dive into more of those goals and strategies.
All summer long, we've been using these Inspire Littleton categories of dynamic and vibrant and outdoors, and by no means am I going to say that I think that's done. But, you know, that you've already sort of, certainly with us, set an expectation that these are the categories we're tackling. Assuming this is a comprehensive list, why couldn't this same framework that you've already built serve as the future guide for the development process?
How is that? So if you read some of those, can we?
A dynamic Littleton, a livable Littleton, an outdoor Littleton, a Littleton with vibrant activity centers, a connected Littleton, a distinctive Littleton, and other.
Sustainable.
That's
This was as November 7th. So
that almost reads as a 4 or 5 word expansion of every major element in the vision statement.
But doesn't that point down to drill everything down to the next level?
I'm passing that
maybe
around.
Instead of trying to figure out how we're going to structure this to start with, maybe we ought to focus on what the substance is we want to see.
outline.
Well, I'm thinking let's start with what the substance is we want to put into it, then look for the common elements, the framework, and whatever, figure out how to organize it. If you start off with an organization plan
Well,
You lock yourself, that's what we did the last time, we locked ourselves into it.
I would argue that we're not, working just with structure. I think what we've got is, these ideas, and we're pretty far along with our ideas, and now we're trying to figure out what's the best way to communicate those. So, are these complete is the big question, I think.
And
And when
as
you
I say-
look at the goals that are in the caps.
As I
is
say,
that
if we can
complete?
differentiate between values and goals and
Are we missing
strategies.
something from what we had as the principles?
So our ideas, though, when we use the term ideas, the question that I ask is, are these ideas that we want to change into a goal? So they were an idea, so is it important enough that it fit with our vision that this idea now in fact becomes a goal? I mean, there has to be that step.
Yeah, and I guess maybe just step back a little bit. When we came up with the principles, what we did was we went directly from what we heard online, what we heard in the meetings, and then organized those. So this is really an organization of what we heard. It's not necessarily the next step, which you guys are taking it to, which is what is our vision, what are our
And
goals?
so we got our vision, right?
Right.
We have these ideas.
Uh-huh.
Now I think we can look at those ideas and say, which ones
And when you're
fall
saying,
within our vision?
when you're saying the ideas, you're saying these principles, or you're saying the goals?
No, I'm saying this.
The principles, okay. Okay,
No,
right.
Yeah.
No, I think we're still calling them different
No.
things.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
exactly.
those are,
Whatever.
these are the
Deja vu
principles,
all over again.
and these are the goals for now.
So these should not be ideas if they're goals, right? Idea would say still an idea, something to evaluate, something to consider. And so whatever, and I think that's what this is. When I heard you say ideas, I was referring to this one,
Okay, the principles,
principles.
right. Because those were, again, the ideas that came out of the public process.
How do you
So-
differentiate between principle and goal?
Ideally, I think the principles could step back a little bit from the goal and
Right.
say, okay, here's who we are, and here's how we
The
operate.
principles are the basic threads running through whatever we select as goals, much less what we select as strategies to achieve the goals.
Right. And there could be some overlap. We might even want to eliminate the principles process, yeah. I mean, if we really want to simplify and be as clear as possible, we might get rid of that, go from vision to goal.
I'll give you an example. Is sustainability really a goal, or is it a basic principle? We want the concept of sustainability to continue through whatever we select as goals, much less strategies.
That's a good argument, yeah. Right. A good
Using the assets we have is the same thing.
Right.
Focusing on the river as a basic asset. I mean, this is not such a large area that somebody's going to be, an hour away from the river. If we're really saying that is our front door or backyard, whatever we want to call it, that's an essential
So then
principle.
you would go vision, principle, goal, I think, right?
I'd at least, maybe as we start talking about goals, we can start extracting the principles
And I guess-
say, there's a consistent theme here for
Right.
several of them.
It's going to be, it may be difficult to have a one-to-one relationship down from all those. Yeah, from the vision to the principles to the goals. There may be blending in there.
No, the principles are going to cover, they're
Right.
going to be universal. It's
Right.
when you get into the goals, and that's when Andrew's right, you go, direct connection, which we tried a few years ago, direct connection from the goals to the strategies on how you're going to
Right.
approach it,
That
and
you
maybe
can-
individual tactics
That
you
you need to,
recommend.
I think, yeah.
Right, there's your one to A and B, to A1, A2, 3, whatever. But the principles ought to be something that is, that's what you're going to follow. Throughout your goal selection, your strategy formulation, those principles are going to be
Well,
everywhere.
we've been talking for a while now about the organizational structure, and we have about 40 minutes left. And I think there was a good point about let's get into the substance of this a little bit and make sure we're in agreement that we haven't missed anything, or that there's something in here that isn't consistent with what we've heard. And has everybody read each one of these? Should we go through each one? How do we want to address it?
And I guess I would say the initial thing to be would read the ones in caps,
Right.
rather than all the details below. I think it gets very cumbersome when you start doing that. Theoretically, that, all that stuff goes underneath that, because those are all the ideas we've heard, but hopefully those are the summary. But
I guess the only one to me that seems a little inconsistent the way it's stated is number 4. I think that's about economic vitality, or maybe a broader subject than
Yeah,
just
good.
capturing revenue, or it's a little awkwardly worded, in my
Good.
opinion.
Just to order written in stone, or is number 7 more important than number 2? Have we gone through that, or is anybody even?
Prioritize them?
Yeah, prioritize. I find sustainability not as important as a couple of others.
Do we really need to talk about priorities on some of these things? I mean, are we going to say priority in terms of, I'm willing to sacrifice a number 3 priority for a number 1 priority, rather than trying to find the right mix of what's going to deliver the goal we're talking about?
Well, I think it says something as to our values, as to what's number 1 versus number 7. We're a nation of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That doesn't mean we have to be.
We don't have to.
Just because we tend to be.
Jenny's closing point, and I'm going to, you should say your quote, because I'm going to screw it up.
You'll have more of whatever you invest in the most.
You'll have more of whatever you invest in the most, and I think to that, we have to at least pick something.
Right.
There may be a tie for 4th and 5th, and we'll just go.
That's fine.
And I think we just eliminated one. I think, the statement that we really need, number 4 really needs to be under a broader category. I think it goes under economic sustainability, probably. So it becomes that, so we've eliminated 1. If we do that, we're down to 7 at that point. So.
I think what came out of the last exercise that we had was, I think there was at least for me, there was an aha moment that, hey, this river is a big deal for Littleton, and it should rise up in importance to how this plan is organized, that it can be a catalyst for the future of the city, and perhaps that suggests that number 3 becomes our first goal. And I do think it is important to sort of organize them in a logical way.
Although to me, sense of community is even, the river vitality is a sense of the community. Sense of community should rise cream to the top, then river, and then whatever else.
River, the way I look at this is, I come back to the first one, which is build upon kiosks. Maybe there's too many of them here. And then treat the river as the city's most valuable resource. Again, becomes one of the most important strategies to execute on building upon or delivering on the key assets.
I can see that, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's, I'm still struggling with what are we calling, to try to prioritize, are these goals, are these strategies? I think we're jumping ahead and we haven't even clearly defined goals, strategies, and I think we have to take it one step at a time, even if all we're going to do, for the rest of this evening, is take 3 goals that we all understand, agree to, and is in alignment with our vision, the ideas and things that we've heard. Otherwise, we're going to just keep going around in circles.
And actually, the number 1, build upon key assets, I almost feel like that's an introduction to describing our vision. Like it's almost, it does. It's almost like let's introduce, these are our key assets before we even go into our goals that we as a community value, and then out of that comes the goals that, anyway, that first one.
What Andrew said earlier is, identifying what are the values, so that was one step on the process.
In a mathematical proof, that would be your given. With a mathematical proof, you state your givens, and then you do go through the if-thens. Okay? These are the givens. The givens are, we're going to make maximum use of the assets we've got. That's a given.
We have to define what they are.
I mean, in terms of category, title, like given.
There are facts that exist about Littleton right now. The given is we have X number of businesses and 12 numbers of communities and 37 churches and 22 hot dog stands.
The givens are, there are certain areas around the periphery of the city that we cannot control as a city. Highway department, the state, somebody else. Those are a given. So for us to take on a goal or a strategy that ignores those givens beyond our control, is short-sighted at best, imprudent at worst.
Based on the key assets that we already have, these are the directions we'd like to see it go. We already have key aspects of 2 major I think you call them arterials, Santa Fe and Broadway, and a good infill box. Based on that key asset, we'd like to heighten or encourage or develop or grow the level of commerce all the way around the city, focusing on those targeted areas that we've identified, and then they become some of the dropout.
Yeah, I guess, my only concern about moving all that to introduction is that when you get into the details underneath it, we may want strategies. When you're talking about historic assets, when you're talking about community college, we may want something that gets into more detail. So that'd be my only concern. I'm not sure how we do it, but I certainly agree that it certainly could be. It's almost an identification of issues and opportunities. These are our opportunities. These are the things we're working with. So,
What are we missing in this? We've got 8 items here, 7 if you throw out 4.
I keep having
What are we
this
missing?
nagging feeling we're missing something. So,
Well, what have we seen presented to us in the last year or two? What's on the back burner right now? What have we talked about as far as future opportunities that isn't covered?
and I think the discussion we had at the first day of the retreat, is there something that isn't in here from that? Because I thought that was such a great summary of what we've been hearing and maybe where we need to go.
What was that, Dennis?
What Chuck and Tom provided, I think, in terms of what they saw, it certainly was what we had been hearing, plus, I think, additional new information.
Well, I would throw out 2 things. One of them may already be built into one of these already, but that is housing. A more directed discussion of trying to achieve a more diverse housing mix, which would contribute to the sense of community and the quality of life. The other is looking to the future. We talked about annexation. We don't really talk about the city growing and or expanding as warranted to be sustainable economically, tax-based, whatever it might be.
Or you mean geographically, Randy? Or?
Yeah, annexation.
Okay.
We talked about it. You brought up the discussion at the very end. We have it on the map here. So I think we need to, somewhere in the comp plan, if we are going down that road, to suggest that the city could grow, that we need to address it somehow, somewhere.
Because we talked about at least having criteria in the comp plan, that if there were...
If there was ever an item for a comp plan which has to do with the future of the city, it would be growth.
Yeah.
And I think as you said, maybe it can become incorporating some of these when you think about catalytic development. Annexation would be a strategy to achieve some of that. But you're right, it's not at all specified, and actually it would almost look like it's excluded from here because this is really specific to some of the comments about partnering with developers.
I would throw out 2 other comments, just not related to what I just said. One is, I think the biggest item on this sheet here, well, the first item would be sense of community, because I think we all agree that whether it's small town character or just the sense of community, that's the biggest thing that our residents like.
And are we comfortable with protect on this one, although we may be getting rid of
Well,
that?
the wording, I'm not going to get into, I'm just saying that that, I think, is one of the biggest
Sort of
items.
slicing and dicing.
Yeah.
Good.
Like
The
I said,
second one,
is sense of community, period.
right, the second one is infill. We are, without a doubt, an infill community.
That's a strategy.
Yeah, infill, we have to reword it or structure it or whatever, but I think that's if you're going to talk about items that have major impact in a comp plan, it's infill. How are we going to handle our infill and our redevelopment? That would be another big one. And the river, how that fits in, the river fits into that, because how are you going to do that with the river? How are you going to do that with the activity areas? How are you going to do that with catalytic projects? They all relate to infill development and redevelopment and things like that. So those are just some thoughts I have.
And basically the ones you just enumerated. the focus on the river, catalytic development, focus on infill, and the connecting activity areas, those are strategies. If we're going to talk about maximizing optimizing the use and the enjoyment of those particular kinds of things, those are the strategies of what we do to build a community. I think 7, the strong sense of communities, is close to what I think Andrew had in mind with mission as anything we have on these 2 pages.
I guess if I were going to write this as the way I think it was a pure goal, if I look at number 7, for example, I'd probably say Littleton's strong sense of community will be protected and enhanced. And as a product, that's when you look at it in 20 years, you're going to have an enhanced and protected sense of community. That's what you're going to see somehow. It's almost physical in what you're looking at as a goal.
What are the goals of the, she's reasonably new, but the economic development director? What are her goals?
Well, that's actually a process going on with the council right now. And in fact, Tom and Chuck are a part of that. So about the same time as hopefully this is going to come around, is they would have a economic development strategy. So that's something that the council is working on right now with the city manager and Denise.
It seems as naive as it may sound, it seems that we absolutely need to know that before we move forward.
I just don't want to stop any effort and wait for them or vice versa. So there are some things happening in parallel, and hopefully we can influence their effort.
And we don't anticipate anything that's going to be in conflict at this point. So
But we're looking at something different. They're looking at economic development, jobs, revenue, whatever it is. What we're going to be looking at is how does that fit in with the rest of our vision for the dynamic, healthy, strongly charactered city. We're looking at it from the planning, from the appreciation standpoint, not from the remuneration standpoint.
Right, we're going to say yes.
They
we
have
need
to be
economic
consistent,
development.
but it's a different perspective.
Yeah.
It will be very tool-oriented.
Right.
Here's the tools we're going to do to get XYZ industry.
I think I agree with you. My simple mind just says all of this stuff has to get paid for. And so if we can come up with the greatest vision that we want, Dubai comes to mind of a guy who built an entire replica of a real city that nobody is in. And we can design that we're going to have a great, vibrant economic waterfront here, but if there's not that same economic development goal, then we can wish all day long.
And I think, as much as we would say we need that, she would say she needs this, right? So and I think that's what Glenn is also saying, so they almost have to happen in parallel because they are so correlated. You can't have one without the other. So what's important, I think, is that we continuously touch base.
Council, city manager, or the economic development director can say, this is what we want to do and this is what we think is going to bring it in. What we've got to be looking at is how is that going to affect the community we have? How do we make those two work together instead of at odds? And let's face it, the debate for the last 5 or 6 years or more has been it's confrontation and opposition, not collaboration.
It would be a shame if we push the riverfront and they push Broadway. I mean,
Yeah.
Just
True. Who owns the comp plan at the end of the day? Just the community. The community, but who's the chief author at the end of the day?
City council, really, they adopt it, I would guess.
The answer would have been different 2 years ago, but now, yes, it's city council.
Well, author, I would say is planning commission. The publisher would be the city council.
Well, he's saying owner, and that's a little
I'm
different.
saying when
Who
you have to
controls
look
it?
somebody in the eye and say, whose plan is this?
It's
Is
city
that
council.
council or is that planning board?
City council.
They're the implementers, yeah, I'd say.
It's city
I
council.
would agree.
City
I would
council
be
is
the city council.
Yeah, right. Without their collaboration, you wouldn't have one. Right.
Without giving
So
what
we
you
should
want,
know-
you wouldn't have one.
Are we able to get some direction of where they want us to
Yes.
go, or is this
In
it?
fact, that's exactly, I'm glad you mentioned that, because February 22nd, we do have a scheduled study session with city council. So I think we need enough meat on these bones to show them ahead of time, this is the direction we're going. Is there a conflict? What are your issues? So we do have kind of that deadline out there.
But
Actually, it's probably prior to that.
So, yeah, between now and then, we have, 3 meetings maybe?
But let's not get too hung up on things. We're not going to sit here, we're not going to sit here and dictate what's going to happen at Ensor. We're not going to sit here and dictate what's going to happen at Marathon. We're not going to even tell the economic development director what she ought to be doing to bring certain kinds of businesses or development in there. All we're saying is as development occurs throughout the city, these are the principles it ought to follow. These are the concerns it ought to address in terms of fitting in to this dynamic, healthy, established community. It's different. They've got to work together, and we look for places where there's potential conflict, and we reconcile. But our focus ought to be on the 30,000 foot. She's going to be worrying about this business and that employer and ways of enticing them or supporting them. That's not what we're about. Shouldn't be what we're about.
Well, in the words of Tom Wooten, I'm just going back to the notes here, said, don't wait for those things to happen,
Right.
but set the lead, take the lead, be proactive, set the stage. So to what extent do we do that in this plan?
Let's do it.
I think we're doing it.
I mean, we may find that we're trying to set buffers that are more limiting to the economic development direction they're trying to take, and that's going to have to be negotiated. We may find that we're going to promote more variation in uses or forms in a particular residential zoning or commercial zoning than they're anticipating, and we're going to have to negotiate and find common ground there too. But it's not a confrontation. It's we're looking at it differently. How do we merge the visions? How do we merge the directions we're taking? But we need to look at it from our direction.
And actually, the timing, I think, is great. These things are coming. Even when we talk about the branding, that's another effort that's happening in another shop. But I am certain they'll all come together.
And the surveys, so.
And the surveys, absolutely good point.
They're going to review those tomorrow night?
Tomorrow will be
Study
the
session.
business survey.
Oh, I thought they were going to do both.
Well, she's going to do kind of a recap of the citizen survey and then go into the business survey that we have results on now. So.
And the citizen survey is online now. It's business surveys too, right? I think, are they both online?
I
The
don't know.
citizen survey is at least, yeah.
Yes, it's on
Well,
today.
if we, as a group, want to get that general orientation about where they might be, what they're hearing that might induce them to go in a certain direction, that would certainly be worth sitting in on.
Yeah, and I thought it really backed up what we learned from MindMixer too. I was really kind of blown away that the community in general thought redevelopment of the existing shopping center should be a key issue.
Isn't that amazing?
I couldn't believe that.
Wow.
It's almost like we schooled them somehow. But
Do we all suffer from groupthink?
Or the same people responded to it.
The only difference
how many of you got one, didn't you? Didn't you get a survey?
I got a survey, I turned it in.
Okay.
I think
My wife did too.
the big difference was downtown parking. wasn't it?
Wait, one per family.
The big difference was downtown parking. The community survey said it's a huge issue.
It's a huge issue, yeah.
And online, people say, no, not an issue.
It's
Yeah.
always been a huge issue. It's only been a matter of interpretation and detail.
Yeah,
That was apparent starting 4 years ago.
yeah.
So how many goals should we have?
Here it says 3 or 5.
7.
Okay? I'll throw out strong sense of community,
Okay?
quality catalytic development, relates to number 5. Integrated, these words are just, can be changed, but integrated open space and activity centers. Something to do with economic development, somewhere in there. Catalytic economic development. Just throw out some major categories that hit upon all these, I think. Because I think the river fits underneath quality development and it fits under a sense of community.
Community, economic development, and what about the connecting the city? So I have connected the city. Some version of that. What did you say for that?
Integrated something to do with integration of open space through connectivity and also connecting the activity centers is in there somewhere.
Well, and I think the connectivity too actually got beyond that. I think it was getting into kind of social connectivity and other things as well.
We got to have something related to connectivity because
Right.
that ties directly into a walkable city, light rail,
Bicycling. Yeah.
bicycling, a lot of things.
So, Dennis, if we go back to the vision, so the three things that, Randy just called out was strong sense of protecting, the strong sense of community, connectivity or integration, and then economic development.
Right.
So could you read the vision?
Quality infill, quality development.
That's right, that's part of the economic development? Or is that separate?
Well, any development is economic development.
And a sense of community, not necessarily, but it could be a sense of community, so maybe
Yeah.
it is separate.
I mean, the nice thing about the word, or the concept that we came up with in the retreat, catalytic development. Catalytic development, economic development, cultural opportunities, housing diversity, those are the catalysts. Varying housing densities, varying open space, varied types of open space or trails or recreational opportunities. That's the catalyst. Well, it's stimulating. One thing promotes, it's the,
It's all inclusive.
it's dropping the ping pong ball in the room full of mousetraps loaded with ping pong balls. Really, that's what it is. That's what we're looking for from seeking new employers, new retails. We're looking for each of those. Each one has a stimulative effect that brings about more. And it isn't linear. It spreads.
It's not just economic development, it's also community development, it's also cultural development.
So at the risk of proving to you that I can read off a wall, it says, the first one is assure a financially sound city government. I don't think that's relevant to us. Totally relevant to us, not relevant to the state. Provide a safe community to live, work, and play. That seems very straightforward in terms of what it means. Develop and maintain the public infrastructure. I think that may touch. Preserve and cultivate a quality community, and that's wonderfully open for interpretation. Pursue a balanced and sustainable local economy. Promote environmental sustainability and foster community involvement, communication, and trust.
So 3 of those are directly relevant, I think, to
Yeah.
land
Environment,
use.
economy, and safe community seems.
Yeah, I don't think safe community, I think that's more fire and police, but,
Well, unless you're talking about, first example, the bridge across the railroad tracks from light rail to.
yeah, there's certainly elements of safety. Yeah.
Well-lit streets like the path along Little's Creek, safety. Is somebody really going to venture down there if it's dark? Trying to establish a pedestrian connection.
I think that's infrastructure,
in
though.
downtown. That's
But
safety.
maybe to
Generally,
your
that's
point,
what they
those
say.
are the givens, right?
More
So
of
one,
safety.
Right,
at least in
I
our
think it's
role,
infrastructure
the
that
given
you're-
is
that
that
we
whatever
want.
we're
We just have to find a
defining
way, yeah.
would be.
They had a bullet of, it says focus on vehicular, bike, and pedestrian safety and accessibility improvement opportunities. So I believe that's one of your matrix boxes ideas.
Okay, you want us to take another shot at this?
Lawyers, guns, and money.
Okay.
It's great, too.
I think what would help, as you do take another shot at this, is, giving us the parameter of a goal is defined as X, Y,
Good.
and Z.
Okay.
A
Yeah,
strategy
I think that would be
defined as,
really helpful.
so that we're not debating what it is. I mean,
Good.
we're at least all grounded on the same
Sure.
definition.
Absolutely. We'll make it real clear.
It's very simple, in my mind anyway. The goal is an element or a result that's going to enhance, going to produce, realize the values, the vision that you've identified up front.
See, and I would differ. I would say the goal is the end product, is the end of your action. So
Yeah,
we
is the
really
goal-
need to
Is the
define it.
goal a park bench on every corner? That's not the goal.
The goal is to win the Super Bowl.
Could be.
So hence my point of let's just clearly define.
Yeah.
And then if we
Yeah,
have an
sequence
issue with the
page.
definition, then let's debate the definition as opposed to what's written.
Shoot us your clear definitions. That would help. Of how you would see it.
A goal is,
I was thinking electronic,
well, I think Dennis has hit a point. It's a very, very distinct difference between a goal being wider sidewalks,
Right.
which I don't see as a goal. I see
It's a way of achieving a goal.
safer, more comfortable, more
Oh, I
inviting
get it. It's much more too
connectivity.
detailed, yeah.
Okay, and then
Yeah,
you
but
start
still a
getting into the
product.
strategies
Right.
and the products, what's it going to take to realize that?
I guess
But
I'm just saying a goal is not an action statement. A goal really is.
what do you want to
something
see,
more
or
concrete.
touch, or feel, or...
You want a walkable community, you want a walkable. use
And then
of-
what's going to develop,
When you have-
then what's going to produce that, and then how do you get that?
Right, exactly, yeah.
And that's why I tried to pick up on Andrew's stuff about the mission, and when we start talking about the strong sense of community and using the assets we have, that's the mission. That's core. We're not going to go away from that. We're trying to maintain and build that sense of community. We're going to build on the assets we have. Now, below that, how do we make that sense of community even stronger? How do we build this interconnected community? And that's where you start looking at the goals. And then once you've said maybe we are going to do something with the promoting sense of involvement. Well, one of the ways of promoting a sense of involvement is to give people places to be involved, whether that's the parks. When people use the trails around Littleton, they talk with each other about what's going on in their schools, about, hey, have you tried this trail down here? That's a means of getting people involved. You give people places to come together, and they're going to talk about it.
Okay, so what was very clear to me was you're saying, what will we produce? So that to me sounds like a goal.
Places to get together and stimulate interaction.
Would that be a goal?
I would think so.
That's how I understood it. And then how you will get there is what we're trying to decide.
Strategies, right?
And Randy, just as an aside, I know number 7 does have some reference to annexation.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I saw it.
Right
We
there.
didn't talk about it from the economic development standpoint. We
I
didn't
don't
talk
know
about it in
that
terms of.
that's
Well, that's consistent with what we said a half an hour or more ago. A lot of the stuff that we think of as missing is buried in here. We
It's
just
in here
have to
someplace.
sort it out.
There's just so much, yeah. We've heard so much over the last 6 months.
I think, as you take another shot at this, it would be good to go back to, as was mentioned, that we look at the way that they were set up before, which was like a sustainable Littleton, a connected Littleton, those...
Principles.
Yeah, that's sort of organizational
Maybe
structure.
more succinct than
What's
what
that?
We've got in here.
Right.
What happened to these ideas that we kind of started and we put this out to 500 people and mind mixer and then
Right.
put on ideas?
No, that was...
Yeah, when I was going into actually developing goals, it didn't seem to work as well. They're not as clean a category as I think we might want.
That wasn't something we put out. That was what we got back and then
Well,
trying to correlate or
no,
organize.
both. We got it back and then we put it out on MindMixer in terms of, do you agree with these categories? Yeah, right. What's the most important of
Kind of
these?
your value statements.
They're principles, I think, yeah, exactly. So I think they're still in there. It's just, do we have to have a one-to-one relationship between those and the goal statements, I guess is the question. So-
No, but between goals, strategies, and tactics, there ought to be direct correlation.
Right.
Connectivity.
So in a certain sense, one of the things, it seems like, is having a template that helps to organize so that we can see how the goals fit within the bigger picture of how plan to organize this.
Yeah, okay.
But at some point,
With-
we're going to have to recognize principles, whether it's guiding principles or limiting principles. We want to promote this particular goal, and we're going to follow this strategy. How far are we willing to take it? How far do we think is acceptable, healthy for a development plan or a city as an organization at some point it becomes imposing on. property owners, developers, business people. So how far are we willing to take it? That's got to be in the principle someplace.
Right.
And what immediately comes to mind is revitalization of shopping areas. How far are we going to take it? There's got to be a principle there. We better recognize it up front, or we're going to be fighting it over it every time a development proposal comes to us.
Well, at the risk of beating yourself up too, isn't there a way just for now to just say, and here are the guiding principles, dynamic, livable, sustainable goals, and then go into goals, and then, you know, we can get to this in future
That's
drafts.
kind of what I was getting to,
Absolutely,
was
I
like
think so.
real
About an hour
basic.
ago.
Right.
Start off with a draft list. You can always
basic
expand on it,
framework.
shrink it down, whatever.
Yeah, I think the list we've got of principles stand pretty clearly. It's just you can't take those directly then to goals, because the goals then are yeah, so.
It's
but
like
they're underlying
sustainability.
all that, yeah, absolutely.
It's like sustainability. It's got to infuse your thinking as you develop the DD.
Do whatever we want.
We can, but
It'd be interesting to test some of these too, with
It'd be
some of the
interesting
things
to
that
test
we
it,
want
see,
to
yeah.
accomplish, you know?
But
How does
I
this
guess-
promote, you know, infill development? How does it enable the city to perhaps use techniques that encourage developers to do a certain thing in a certain property?
they're certainly there. I mean, when we're developing the goals, I made sure that all those principles were incorporated. Outdoor Littleton, you know, we came in as number one for a while. It's now kind of tied with others, but it was really strong for a while. That was number one. So it really rings through with all the stuff we're talking about, the river and what we're talking about with the parks. Sustainable Littleton, yeah, it came up as number two, and now it's tied, I think, for number one. So it's all built in there, I think. It's just, to get to the goals, seems like it's a little bit more specific, so, and somehow,
Along the way,
Back-
though,
this
we're
is
going to
back
have,
behind it.
along the way, we're going to have to find a comfort level with a lot of spectrums of approach, from let anybody do whatever they want with their property to public condemnation, okay, and everything in between. Do we, as far as green space is concerned, is the principle every open piece of land we can get our hands on we take, or do we focus on strategic and directed development and linkage?
well, and we don't have anything, you know, as a principle. I think it talks directly about that maybe at this point.
Well, I'll give you one principle. Is more always better, or, you know, what is it that should guide our acquisition or connection of open space and trails? The more the better, or do we need to make sure that we can accommodate the variety of needs that our population is likely to need?
Because, you know, one of the assignments, I guess, if we go back and look at what we're looking at for goals at this point and make sure they're consistent with the principles and that we aren't missing anything from the principles. We don't see anything major that we're not saying and any conflict between those two.
Yeah, or we're not getting ourselves into something in the way of goals
Right.
that transgress those principles.
Right. So I think there's so much overlap. You know, the goals really build on a lot of those things.
How do we envision in this February 22nd meeting, this being presented?
You do it. And you present it.
Cool. Well, Dennis, I'd take that as tongue-in-cheek, and I would be happy to do it.
No, so I think the board presents.
Because if we can't defend it, if we can't state it very clearly, defend it, then we did it wrong.
Right, exactly, absolutely, which I think is why we've got to have those talking points, why we have to have the vision that's exceedingly clear, the principles that are clear, and it's 3 to 5 goals, I think really starts being defendable. Yeah,
We have
you
to
can
tell the
explain.
council what they're going to think.
Right. I'm a little worried we have too many principles, maybe, that they can be combined. So
Been
that's,
there, done that. I'm going to suggest that we and city council and staff ought to think through, those of us who were around the last 2 or 3 attempts at this, and recognize that if we're going to approach it the same way this time, I'm going to take a vacation, because it'll be a waste of time.
okay.
We got nowhere. I've been on the board for, 5 years now?
Yeah.
Okay? We've had 4 of these little tete-a-tetes. They've all produced exactly zip. Because they were not receptive to what we wanted, not to what we wanted to get from them in terms of feedback and interchange. The few things, the few principles and major elements we were able to enunciate engendered nothing but negative comments from them. Here's what we don't like about that. Not we're on board with you. okay, we're going to take exception to this and take exception to that, but we're not here to talk about it. We were expecting you to give us something to vote on. We better get that clear up front, or it's going to be a total waste of time
Expect us to give us something, what?
to vote on.
Oh, to vote on, oh,
Now,
okay.
granted, that was under a different mayor.
I'm not-
But I'm just saying, if we repeat the same pattern, we're condemning ourselves to failure.
I would suggest that we, when I say we, collectively, between council and us, come up with an agenda and a sort of ground rules for, perhaps there's a 10-minute presentation from planning board and 10-minute presentation from council of the primary elements so that there's a basis of discussion.
Can there be a pre-meeting?
Actually, we tried that.
I'm totally serious.
No, we tried that.
Can we sit down with two representatives from the planning commission, two representatives from city council, some city staff around, to say, this is what we're gonna, it goes from the principle, don't walk into a meeting where you don't know what's gonna be said.
Right.
That lay out, this is where we're thinking, you think that's gonna fly? Oh, yeah, don't say this, we'll say this, but when you talk about this point, make sure Jerry understands what you're talking about, and then we can lay in, just sort of set ourselves up to succeed.
Yeah.
Organizing what we're going to say is the easy part. We've done that successfully in the past. It's establishing a mutual attitude going into it about after we've laid out where we think we've headed, the main points. What do we think, how's the rest of the meeting going to go on? Is it going to be a give and take, and a brainstorming, a discussion? What's the expectation? If we don't have the same expectation going in, we're wasting our time.
I think that's what you can try to have at that pre-meeting, right? And again,
I
it's
think
not
we could do that.
An official pre-meeting of everyone here and everyone there. It's, all right, let's figure it out together. We have to be in this together, otherwise we're wasting everyone's time. And so that I think will help facilitate that conversation.
Between now and then, how many planning board public hearings do we have, and how much time do we have?
We have about 3 meetings.
How many of them are
We still have
planning
business.
public meetings?
Oh,
Applications and hearings.
we may have one the last meeting in January, but not before then. So, I think that is.
Anything that we can break up in groups and, we've done that before, right?
In groups of 2,
Not more than 2.
More than two, right?
It's our limit.
Or we post it. That's all.
right.
So then we just have to go through the
Posting.
rigmarole of posting. But that's not.
Well, our next
Or,
meeting is
how do we
not
divide
for
it
4
up?
weeks, right?
So
Our
we
next
won't
meeting's
be
4
meeting on the 24th.
Right.
So our next meeting would be the 14th of January, and then the 28th of January. We may have a public hearing on the 28th of January. And then you have the 11th of February, and then you're into council session.
So for those of us between now and the 14th of January that are just itching and have nothing else to do and really want to get into it, is there any way that we can help you sort of, is there something that could be circulated during that time that we can comment on?
You bet.
Well, let's be realistic.
Yeah.
You're leaving town.
I'm leaving town.
So you're going to do it.
I will be.
I'll be here.
Piece of crap, but I'm at it.
So really,
I'll be here this week and next week.
if we're going to have any kind of little
Part of this week.
pre-meeting between the council rep and us,
I don't know how to do that.
Well-
It's a great idea, but, yeah.
even if it's just a little breakfast conversation or something, or a sit-down, we need to do that before our meeting on the 11th, or whatever comes out of that meeting isn't going to have an opportunity to really get
Yeah.
conveyed to us.
Right. There is some flexibility in that date. We can always push that.
February 22nd date, right? Is that the
Yeah. That can be pushed out. I don't really want to, because it's kind of the time frame that we've stuck to, and it works for us. And I think it'll keep us on a high level. So,
February 22nd is Friday.
yeah, I threw that number out, so it's that,
21st,
it'd be the 4th.
Thursday?
They meet on Tuesdays.
Okay, so that's
It's the
President's Week, a lot of kids are on
26th.
vacation, so I'm on vacation.
26 sounds right.
26th.
That's Wednesday.
No, that's
That's Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Okay.
Calendars.
This year. Right. I'll firm up that date and send it out to you.
So what date is it, the
26.
26th?
Well, in terms of a pre-meeting to set the ground rules, I think between now and then, we have 2 months. We could figure out a way to do that, even if we have to use staff as an intermediary.
We'll have a meeting on the 25th, the night before.
We will.
Right,
So
yeah.
that brings it closer together, easier to schedule a little setup meeting and then convey the results of that to us, so we all go into it with the same idea, same understanding.
Okay, do I have a
I'd
motion?
like between now and then, I'd like to hear, if we can't formally sit down for perfectly legitimate, silly reasons, can we get some sort of direction or comment about the key directions that council would like us to have, or some sort of, at least a sentence to say this is the way we want you to keep going?
Yeah. My only concern is if you don't show them anything and you ask what direction you want us to go, it's kind of what we always run into. Give council what you think it ought to be. Don't say, well, what do you think? Because you just don't ever get there. So
I'd welcome them to see the next draft of this, give us comment, and then let us come back and do this again.
Yeah.
So that by the time we get to a study session, that
So
we're
send it
already
out.
another lap around the track.
yeah.
So maybe it's more about us presenting at that breakfast session the draft and having them then provide verbal comments on it or something.
What's the breakfast session?
No, it's, yeah.
Study session.
The study session, it's an evening one.
When you work with an architect, the first thing the architect does is draws a sketch plan. It says,
Right.
is this what you want?
Right.
You say yes. He says, okay, and then he goes back.
I collect my retainer first.
I was going to say, no, the first thing architects these days do is, that'd be a neat building, right?
I'll build it. To that point, is this the house you want? Is this the comp plan you want? Great, give us your feedback. All right, now we'll start talking about what the rooms look like.
We're not there, and we're not going to be there in 2 months. We're not. We can talk about the kind of house,
50,000
we can talk
view.
about the kind of house, we can talk about the flavor of the house, we can talk about essential elements, but we're not going to be able to say, well, there's a picture of the house, does that look good?
That's,
We're not gonna be-
it's the framework.
We're not
It's
gonna-
really the framework.
Are we talking about a bungalow, or are we talking about a mansion? Are we talking about an estate out in the woods? Are we talking about a beachfront property, or whatever? We're going to have to talk generally, and we may focus on principles and the values or whatever, and maybe we'll solidify it enough on what we're getting into in major goals and some of the directions and strategies, so they get a flavor for where we think we're headed with this, or how we're going to approach it. But we're not going to have details. Not the kind of details that they
That's
discuss.
what we want sign off on. We want sign
Right.
off on the vision.
I'm just saying, and if that's the best we're going to do, in the past, that's what we tried to get from them, tried to get feedback from them, and couldn't. So if we don't establish up front, here's what we think we're going to bring, here's what we'd like to hear from you, not a 4-3 vote, just feedback. Does it sound like this is taking us in a direction that you're not going to find objectionable, that's jiving with other things that you're doing through the economic development plan or whatever, so that we know, do we have to fine tune and continue, or do we have to rethink, step back, and take a new approach?
So their answer is going to be, yeah, in concept or in theory, that sounds fine, but I need to see the details.
That's more than we've gotten in the last, Karina, that is more than we've gotten in the last 4 years. That is more than we've gotten in the last 4 years. What we've gotten in the last 4 years is, bring us a detailed plan and we can vote on it, we'll be okay.
We'll shoot for that.
If we get that, that's good.
Yeah, I see it as a victory.
Okay, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. It's after 9. Are we good to go?
When are we going to get the next version of Vision Goal?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be the beginning of January.
Oh, thank you.
So we'll get it ahead of the next meeting.
Get it within a year 11 meeting.
Yeah.
Could we trade ideas, concepts back and forth through you and Dennis between now and then?
You mean just cold ideas, or?
Just throw things out, and if it's something that sounds like we ought to get some feedback on, and we've got the time to do it, fodder for the mill, grist for the mill.
Does the city have the ability to set up a public blog that we can write on?
I don't know.
We have talked about that. I'll ask Kathy again. She's so swamped right now.
We keep sunshine laws, but allows a conversation to continue.
Sort of an internal blog that's just for us,
It's open to
anybody?
the public that we can.
Wasn't that what Inspire Littleton is?
Well, yeah, but if Inspire Littleton, you get other people tagging in on it.
Basically, we just said, let's get a bunch of momentum tonight, and by the way, I'll see you in a month.
One thing on Inspire Littleton, we do have approval to keep it going, so we can use it as we put out drafts and get feedback from that system as well. So it's not going to go dark at the end of the year. We're going to extend the contract till we get through this, so.
Yeah, it's one of the problems with this process is it's, you get some momentum and then you have to kind of step back for a while and then try to remember where you were and you end up repeating yourself a bit and kind of the nature of the beast, huh? Thanks.
Are we missing two centers here? One current and one projectable?
That's the composite of both teams.
Okay.
Well, you weren't here. were you?
No, I'm just asking,
Oh,
are we
okay.
missing what's going on up around west of Santa Fe and Bellevue? If that's not a retail center, I don't know what is. And if we're talking about annexation area down here around where at the dam end of McClellan Reservoir, that's another one.
Yeah, those are nodes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Whether you call them retail centers, activity
Activity
centers,
centers, yeah.
nodes, or whatever, those look like two fairly obvious ones that we kind of ignored.
What was the second one? I'm sorry, Dave.
Well, the one up Bellevue and
Right, I got that.
west on Bellevue from Princeton, the other one down there, they had the dam on McClellan.
Oh, okay.
Especially if we're looking at possible annexation on the other side of County Line Road.
You need a legend down here because I'm not sure
Yes.
what is what.
Okay, yeah. we'll do that.
And a scale in the north area, Dennis, come on. Just kidding. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah. For that matter.
Happy
Dennis,
holidays.
It's the third one.
West on Bowles and South Platte Canyon.